Chief Gardner, come to the front. We're gonna come on up. We're gonna hit public safety together. And colleagues, just by way of sort of a little bit more of an agenda for today, other than just APFO. Per my scorecard, the couple of areas we had questions on were stormwater, fire, police. Those are things we have not yet discussed. And then, of course, our friends from the school system. We were in the midst of a conversation. We asked them to come back, or to be ready to come back by around 11:30. So I think the plan is to go back to that, but it would be good to try and hit those others as well. I guess by way of a time, do folks have, I just have very few things on stormwater. So if anybody doesn't object, we can, since Mr. Edmondson has been gracious enough to be at just about every hearing we've had and hasn't yet been called up to the table, maybe we can ask him to take a seat after our friends here from Fire and Police. So, gentlemen, thank you very much for being here. So we are beginning our work session on APFO-related legislation, and appreciate your time. And let me first and foremost thank you for coming again. I know you've been spending a lot of quality time watching the rest of the APFO proceedings, but we appreciate your being here again, and especially having you here to ask some questions. So, colleagues, I will throw it open to all of you. Yes, Dr. Ball.
All right. Good morning, Chiefs. It's good to see you both. So, as you know, many other jurisdictions have certain APFO tests related to public safety. And there was a great deal of conversation during the APFO task force about those issues. However, nothing really made it into the legislation. So I frankly just wanted to get your perspective on how other jurisdictions are dealing with it. Are there things that you think should be in the legislation or be considered to ensure that, we are having the adequate facilities as it relates to public safety?
I'll answer it once.
I mean, I'll start out.
Thank you, Chief Gardner.
First of all, from the police perspective, just a little bit brief background about what we do, and then I can touch on a little bit about the other jurisdictions. I don't have a lot of knowledge of specifics from them, but for us, what we do is every 3 years we do a workload analysis in-house with each of the three commands, looking at staffing needs, looking at services that we feel based on policing trends, crime trends that we need to look at and address. Those recommendations that are completed every 3 years then go into the 5-year plan that we have in the police department, and that takes a look at the growth in the community, calls for service, response times, and those things. And so, for example, 2010 was the last time that we expanded our beats in the county to address response times and respond to the call load for each of the beats. So now we actually have 30 in the county. We expanded it by 5 from then. Presently, right now, as a result of the new district station that we're looking at in Columbia and Harper's Choice, we did an RFP for a consultant to come in and work with us to develop a long-term plan looking at the redeployment of our personnel for a new district station, how that deployment would look with our 3-district operation. Also to take a look at our beat structure and call load, workload per officer, and also the population projections and growth. We've been working with DTZ on all of that in their forecasting models as an overlay as well. That report is actually due the end of November by Matrix, the company that was hired. So that will give us a blueprint moving forward. In regards to, so really we are looking at the changing environment, not necessarily annually, but we're taking a look at that every 3 years in-house, and then as part of our 5-year plan that we evaluate, looking at the crime trends and issues that we have in the community to make sure that we're meeting those needs. And I apologize, I don't have a lot of expertise in this area from what I'm seeing in the other jurisdictions. From what I gather, as far as major jurisdictions, Carroll, Prince George's, and Montgomery have some test. The Carroll test simply looks like it appears to be an officer ratio to population, which is not a recommended metric according to the IACP and also the Police Executive Research Forum. There's so many factors that go into determining that. So, for example, in Howard County, community policing is a philosophy that we believe in that involves much more than just responding to calls for service. It requires us to be proactive, community engagement. We've created an entire division now in outreach. All of those things factor into that. And plus, when you look at officer ratios to population, they take the total number of sworn members to the population. Well, there's a lot of problems with that ratio. So, for example, that's looking at the entire population of the sworn membership of that agency. It doesn't take into consideration and break it down to the patrol force that's out in the 30 beats, because we have overlays of other specialties: outreach, pathway patrols, special assignment section, our ROPE, repeat offender unit. All of those members are still working on various aspects of crime and addressing that. So all of those things are lumped into a ratio. So just a quick, simple example, you could have an agency that's very heavy in specialties, very limited on the road, but their ratio is going to look pretty good on paper. That doesn't necessarily mean they're the ones out there responding to calls.
It's not a right
So-
resources for the, it doesn't necessarily address the right resources that are needed for a particular jurisdiction.
Right, it's not necessarily going to impact response time.
Right, but with that said, just to give us an idea, where is your ratio
Right now,
right now?
we're at 1.5.
So that's significantly better than what they're saying is adequate, right?
No.
What,
Or 1.2.
who, I don't know who you're
Down
referring to.
Below 1.2.
We're just
Where?
looking at, there is in the
That's right.
APFO task force book,
Correct.
I'm assuming they're looking at
I've got it right.
section appendix
1.5
O.
is 1.5 is significantly better than what they're showing here. Is there, they say that it's adequate if the population is at 1.3 to 1,000. Their concern level is when it gets to 1.2 to 1.3. So even with that, I understand what you're saying, and I
Okay.
agree with you. I'm just trying to
Okay.
get it relative to things that, as people point out to different jurisdictions.
Right.
We may not have it, but that's, and maybe whether it's needed or not, that ratio, different story.
No, I agree, and over the last decade, we certainly have improved that ratio has improved. I think we were down to 1.2, 1.3 a decade ago, approximately. That's really taking a close
So
look.
and
I
that's
believe
actually,
what it
without APFO, that's actually, and you guys addressed it knowing you needed to address it.
But like I said, there's so many complexities with that, so I cannot, it's difficult to put a number on, for example, our repeat offender unit. I mean, they were so successful the first year, we doubled it in size because they focus on repeat offenders, where we know that repeat offenders, for example, are responsible for a significant portion of our issues in the community. So by focusing on them, we actually have a significant impact with a fewer number of officers, if you understand that comparison.
You mean fewer number of officers, patrol officers?
Right, I mean, this is a specialized unit that
Right, but
focuses on
the same number
surveillance
of
work.
officers, you're just concentrating them in one.
Right, on a specialty area.
So, but I guess in looking at that, the idea of using a ratio, it seems like what the examples you're giving all would go to how the ratios could be overstated, but it's still, you
Correct.
could still have a minimum
Good.
standard. And what would be wrong, what would be the problem with that ratio if we had I understand that you're saying there's actually more officers. You're saying that, because it's counting sworn officers, right? And that includes all those other folks.
Correct. So, for example, if we added 20 officers tomorrow, but we put them all in specialties, in detectives, in the
Right.
forensic unit, that will have no impact on our response time in the community. Do you
Right,
understand
but
what I'm saying?
that would, yeah, but that would actually let you meet the ratio easier, right? Because if we were just counting patrol officers and saying you had to have a certain number of patrol officers per population, but you're saying we have all these people, even though they're not on patrol, they're making us safer some other way. But this is counting,
True.
you said this is counting sworn officers.
Correct,
that would
that's
be
counting
everyone.
all.
Yeah.
Right, but I mean, if you look at those tests, I think in some of the other jurisdictions, I think they talk about response times and the ratio in there. It's usually seems like it's those two. I may be wrong. I can tell you it's been difficult us trying, in the short time period here, really trying to get a strong handle with Prince George's and Montgomery counties is exactly what they're,
Yeah, I don't think
what
there's
they're doing, if you understand.
specifically response times from a police
All right.
perspective.
No,
There's
we-
ratios, and then
Getting them to
there's
go on record
general.
is very difficult for what they're actually doing,
Right.
police side of things.
It's pretty
Police side.
ambiguous, yeah, at least from what we have, it seems pretty ambiguous for the other two.
So I guess you've indicated why you thought ratios might not be the best measure by which to decide whether or not facilities are adequate. Are there other police measures that you think might be more appropriate to put into APFO?
Specific measures to take a look at whether or not we should allow growth.
No, not to not allow growth, but to make sure that we are
That we have
adequately.
adequate public facilities. What are the things
I-
that we should be thinking about as we're looking at development to ensure that we have an adequate public facility that relates to the police?
Well, I guess I'll distinguish between, for policing, when we talk about adequate facilities, it's not as critical, for example, and I don't want to speak for John, but they respond from a facility, a fixed location for their equipment to be situated throughout the county. In policing, you'll look at any one of our big 7 jurisdictions, and you'll see district stations everywhere. So, for example, in Montgomery, I think it's the Germantown district, probably has the largest geographic area that it serves. But you'll find in the other more dense populations, they'll be pretty much centric because they go out into patrol beats. So, for example, our southern district today, the majority of those officers travel to Columbia, but they're in beats responding to calls. So the facility itself is not as critical for that response time and service delivery. I look at the facility for the resources that we have in our support sections, such as criminal investigations, our other support units, and for crime lab and all those things. But for example, in Columbia, it was our vision and belief that the largest populated area, we should have a facility that houses our command staff, that people, 100,000+ folks, should have a facility in their community that they can go to and interact with the police department. For services that we respond to calls and proactive community policing, having them in beats is really what all the other jurisdictions have. That's what we're looking at in ensuring a response time. So, for example, I would bet John probably has very specific requirements for response time for medical and fire calls. In policing, it doesn't exist. You will not find anywhere a global golden rule response time. If you look around the region, and we've done this a number of times, and it's very difficult getting agencies to commit to it, but we look in the 5 to 6 minute response time range for a Class 1 emergency call is what most would deem satisfactory, and that's what we shoot for.
So just, I'm sorry.
And what is our, like,
It
if
depends
that's
on
what we're
parts of
shooting
the
for?
county. We are in the 5 to 6 range, so, we may be 5.25 in center parts of Columbia. We may be 5.75 in western part of the county.
So just to be clear, I'm looking at, based upon the research that the APFO task force looked at, there were 3 jurisdictions that had some sort of police level of standard, at least as of 2012. Carol looks at ratios, which you indicated you didn't think were quite appropriate.
And no professional law enforcement organization recommends that.
Okay. Montgomery looks at adequate.
Recommends it for what?
Pardon me?
Recommends it for what?
As an adequate metric for solely looking at it for staffing levels.
So it's not appropriate to look for it for staffing levels, but is there some issue with using it for APFO?
Well, but for APFO, you're looking at it for services, correct? That's why I said it's misleading if you say that the ratio is X, and that's going to be satisfactory for your community.
It's a minimum standard. There are other things that you need to do, but is there something wrong with it being a minimum standard? And is there some recommendation against using it for
But how are you picking that? How are you choosing what that ratio is?
The ratio doesn't impact the level or give an indication of the adequacy of the staffing, then, and we're talking about for an adequate public facilities ordinance, I'm trying to understand what you're asking him, Councilman Terrassa.
We're trying to figure out a way to measure policing in terms of APFO, because unless you disagree with the idea that more people means more crime, more need for services.
No, but going to Dr. Ball's question, he was asking which things overall can make, but going to the staffing ratio, he had just said that didn't make, the staffing ratio didn't make sense, and you were staying on the staffing ratio versus, I think it would make more sense to have the discussion around the other ones or something else he would suggest. He answered that, and I thought you asked him basically the same question.
Yeah, I
So
guess
for
I'm
example,
just,
one of the other things that we're looking at with the current study that's underway with Matrix is an unofficial industry standard for policing with progressive police departments, a 60-40 split with obligated time and unobligated time. Obligated time being the time that is devoted to responding to calls for service when you're tied up. So from the moment of going to that burglary call to the completion of it to include a report, versus unobligated time, which would be time devoted to proactive policing in doing foot patrols, other types of community engagement, and other types of selective traffic enforcement, addressing community issues and so forth. So they look for that 60-40 split. And that's one of the things that Matrix is doing in determining whether or not, since that's our goal, what additional beats we may need in the county to address that, and then also looking at the span of control for supervisory oversight of those beats.
so would those be standards that we might be able to put in to ensure that we're meeting the public safety adequacy as it relates to police?
You certainly could. I mean, that could be, it's a goal,
Okay.
absolutely.
Could you get us some of that information?
I won't be able to until the study's completed. It's going to be end of November. Matrix is doing that. It's very time consuming. We've never actually had an outside consultant come in to do a review of the police department. We've all done it in-house.
So say we were going to vote on this legislation in early November. What standards would you recommend, if any, as it relates to APFO and policing to ensure the adequacy of service?
Well, we certainly look at response times. That's one of the things that we look at when we do our assessment is a response time of between 5 and 6 minutes.
That average certain or percentage of them meeting, being in that bucket. I mean, how do you look at it as being, meeting it or not meeting it?
Well, again, this is all very difficult to assess. So Montgomery County, for example, uses 7 minutes. Ask Montgomery County if they've ever recommended denying any type of growth because they're not meeting 7 minutes, because it fluctuates. So, for example, in our western end, we have 4 beats. If 2 officers in those beats go down with a DUI arrest, those are 2 beats that no one's in because they have arrests. So that response time will change. It's not going to be reflected. So it's a very,
Is it an average?
yes, this is an average. Yes. It would be an average
Right.
looking at the total calls for service. And then what we try to do, we have 6 overall areas, 3 in each district, and we try to take a look at each of those areas to look at the overall response times. And they will fluctuate.
Are you able to provide us with baseline response times, where we are now, where we've been maybe this past calendar year?
Past calendar year?
Or
No,
how
that's-
do you collect the data? How are they available?
The data is, again, that's another one. It's very difficult looking at this response time because of how it's captured in CAD, and that's what we rely on, CAD. So
It's difficult in the sense that it's hard to understand, like, is it hard to print out and provide to us, or what's
You
difficult
can look
about
up
it?
and you can Google any kind of research you want to on response times and policing. It's how it's captured, it's how it's logged in by the dispatcher. So for example, a domestic call, just to give you one simple example of how difficult this is and why we're paying a consultant, because when the last time it was done in 2009, we did the best job we could with the data that we had. But for example, you get dispatched to a call that requires a two-person response, and the person arrives in the area, but the second unit hasn't arrived yet to go in for a domestic, for example. Some dispatchers may log that in as arrival. The others may not log that in until the second person arrives, that actually they've arrived on call. There's all these little nuances to it, and basically we're just going on those averages,
So
if that makes
for the
sense.
purposes of APFO, though, what would you recommend?
I think you will.
For response time,
Yeah.
we shoot for between 5 and 6 minutes for our response times, for priority one calls. Priority one calls.
Just as an example, Prince George's has 10 minutes for non-priority. Actually, no, it's 10 minutes total for emergency calls, Prince George's.
I'm sorry, what?
It's 10 minutes for emergency calls for service.
And you're saying Montgomery was? You said Montgomery was 7?
Montgomery says 7. So again,
Yeah.
this is the range. So Prince George's says 10, another says 7. A lot depends on what the community expects from its police department some are just, right, people want officers there as soon as possible. But the reality is, in some jurisdictions, it's, PG set of 10. I don't know what determination they used for 10 minutes. It's just not that simple. I'm sure it's much easier with the fire service.
It'll be nice and simple with
I
Chief
just-
Butler, teach Chief Gardner how
Right.
it's supposed to be.
Can I ask and you,
Chief,
Teach
you
me.
may, you may have-
So, if I might, we've certainly grown over time. And since we've been sitting on the council, we have watched the growth of the police department and authorized additional officers.
Yes.
And so we are talking about adequate, right? And so I heard you say you continually look at it. Is there any point in our development process where you are consulted in terms of, if we're going to allow this, you get a chance to look at it and say, right, and think about what that might mean in terms of added resources that might be needed from your perspective?
Are you talking about in plan review?
Yeah,
Right.
No, we do not review
Okay.
those plans.
Well,
Again, what we do with planning and zoning, we're actually engaged with them right now in the forecasting models for population growth of the county.
Okay.
We are looking at that, and the consultant matrix has that information, and they're putting that into what information they've gleaned already, and also looking at the projections down the road for us.
do you use that information as you prepare a budget to take to the county executive?
Yes, and that would be part of our overall 5-year plan that we look
Right.
at each year and tweak. So, for example, 10 years ago, would we be looking for an Asian liaison in the police department? Probably not. But now that we've seen that growth, it's rapid, fast-growing, and with language barriers, that was something that we did. One of the things that we probably need additional resources is our digital forensics. We are having a greater demand for turning around evidence because everyone has a cell phone, and that cell phone now is like a computer was when I was in detectives in the 90s, where we would seize computers and do the workups. Now we're seizing, in addition to computers, cell phones that have as much information. And so that requires a timely response. And so we look at that caseload, the turnaround, and we're probably at a point now where we must do that. But were we looking at that 10 years ago? No. And so that's what I'm talking about when I look at crime trends and policing trends. What is going on. Community outreach. That may not have been something that grew as fast as it did had we not had other incidents nationwide that impacted all of law enforcement across the country.
Can I stop you? And Mr. Brownell, this is related to police. This is why I'm asking him to come up.
And in fact, I just sent him an email this week thanking him for his service working with us. Right? I told your supervisor to put that in your evaluation.
Well, a piece of this, it gets to, so Mr. Brownell, when we did the Downtown Columbia Plan, something that I'm intimately familiar with, you did a fiscal analysis for us that made some assumptions about police service, because the question was, would the development pay for itself over time? And if I recall correctly, you factored in adequate policing.
Yes, yeah, we factored in all services, all county services, including police, fire, parks, and all of those different services, yeah.
And so as part of the development of our general plan then, you're doing the same thing, correct?
Right, so when we did when we contemplated Plan Howard 2030, there was a fiscal impact study that went along with that, that looked at the costs and the revenues to make sure that the growth projected in Plan Howard 2030 would be fiscally sound moving forward.
Okay.
And then also the allocations are based on the general plan. I think it's one thing to point out as far as APFO. Howard County, I think, is the only jurisdiction in the state that has an allocation system. And the allocation system works really well in terms of all services. So, for example, the projections that I gave Chief Gardner for the consultant matrix, we know in great detail when the growth is going to happen and where it's going to happen, in large part because of the APFO allocation system. So we're able to give those forecasts to the police department. We give them to Public Works for water sewer. We give them to Parks and Recreation for their park planning. We give them to solid waste management, for example. And they're all the same projections. And they're pretty detailed. They're down to the parcel level. So they can be arranged in many different ways by police beats or fire service areas, et cetera. So one of the values of the allocation system is we're able to plan for capital budgets and moving forward based on what was adopted in the general plan for growth.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
And
so-
if I could just add that during that changeover when we redid our beats, we also aligned with the statistical reporting areas that they use for population growth, so it's easier for us to manipulate and change our beats. Whereas before, our beats were done in a completely separate, in a vacuum that we did in policing. We drew the lines and made our beats, but then in 2010, we converted over to coincide with their tracking of population growth in the county, so it makes it easier.
So in fact, then, if that's the case,
What does that mean, though?
then I would think you're able to utilize that data now to deploy your staff appropriately to meet the needs or the increasing needs in different areas.
Yes.
And know when you have to come back to the county executive and the council in your budget for additional positions.
Correct. It's like the Columbia plan. We knew that with the growth in there that it was going to have an impact. But quite honestly, when we did this back in 2008, 2009, and looking at our beat restructuring, we're just overwhelmed with those numbers, and that's why I wanted to bring a professional group that has background in police alignment and redeployment to come in and assist us and work with us for what we currently have and where we need to be and moving forward in 10 years as well.
You mean for downtown? You said you were
No, the whole
overwhelmed,
county.
but you said you were
Downtown in
overwhelmed by the
particular,
numbers.
But in particular downtown, because, for example, that beat David 4, which is what that is, it's one of our busiest beats in the county, and it's largely because of the Columbia Mall. So, in evaluating that, we have been discussing whether or not, a foot assignment down there maybe would be something that we consider down the road instead of a mobile. And that's why we started incorporating things like the electric car that we have that's on the pathways. So we are looking down that road as well.
And can we just go back to the allocation? You said the allocation system works well to predict this. But our allocations have, that, so the old system had it by area. But the current system has allocations by growth and revitalization areas, and then, what's the other one? Somebody quickly.
Oh, established.
Thank
yeah,
you.
established.
Existing communities, thank you.
Established communities.
So how does that help the police to plan for where that would need to go?
Well, one way to think about it, the allocations actually, places a cap. It's around 2,000 units per year. It's 1,850 plus downtown Columbia, I think. And so that cap can't be exceeded each year. That's countywide, so that certainly helps. But getting to your question about the areas, for the short term, we actually project based on the plans that we have in process, so we know where the development's going to be, and typically it can be anywhere from 3 to 10 years if it's a phased plan. So for the immediate term, given that we have a horizon, when a plan comes in, we know it's going to be there in 3 to 10 years, depending on the phasing. So that's the near-term data, which is very good, because we
Does
actually
that
have it.
does that relate to APFO, or wouldn't you have that data anyway in terms of plans and progress?
We would have that anyways. APFO kind of puts a cap on it. So the far out data is really where the cap applies. And in terms of projecting for future growth in the far out years, given the areas are bigger now, it is a little bit more speculative. Although the truth is, the county at this point is getting to the point where there's not much land left anyways. So we kind of know where in the county it's going to be more clearly than we ever had. And then we do make redevelopment assumptions in certain areas along Route 1 where the zoning might allow for that. And that's the best guess, basically, conservative guess of what could happen maybe in 15 years. So the short-term data, 5 to 10 years, is very good, just like any projection. The longer-term
Go
data,
ahead.
a little bit more speculative.
But in terms of a cap, not
As far
in
as a
terms of
cap-
where.
As far as a cap, APFO is very good because we know in year 10, we're not going to have 4,000 units. We know we're limited to what the allocations say in the general plan, because it's a 20-year chart.
If I can continue on that line, and then I do want to get back to the chief so we can close out the public safety portion. But so just to process, the general plan generates the allocation numbers, and then so we're managing against those numbers, as you said, a cap. We have some visibility at a local area level. And then going back to what you said earlier, though, and that information is then shared with all the respective areas, public safety, our solid waste folks, and Public Works, everybody in the county gets that in our parks, right? So all those other elements that we consider that other jurisdictions handle at a category level, we're handling at that level through the allocation
Right.
side. So
Yeah.
the information, they can't move forward, the allocations can't be made, or it's assumed that the allocations are set so that we can plan for that adequacy of facilities based on this 10-year projection, or 10-year plan in the
Right.
general plan.
Yeah.
Did I summarize that?
I think that's good, and I don't think there's any other jurisdictions in the state that have this allocation system. So I guess the one way to look at it is the allocation system is kind of an overarching test, so to
Right.
speak. It doesn't stop growth like the schools do, which is kind of an added thing. But
Oh,
it,
wait,
but it
I'm
is
sorry, we have-
Mr. Burnett,
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
sorry.
Can you please
Oh.
move the mic a little
Sure.
bit closer and
Okay.
speak into it?
Saw the
Thanks.
green.
You're good, just some of them you have to be closer to, they're not all
Okay.
on the
Right.
same thing. yeah.
So
So
yeah,
you're talking about how
yeah.
it's that
So I
it's
think
yeah.
Howard County is the only jurisdiction in the state that has this allocation system, which allows for this good planning moving forward. So the general plan is the driving plan of the county, and then when Parks and Rec updates their plan, which I think is every 6 years, they base it off the general plan projections, and so they know, and they have standards. They have so many acres per person, and so they know how many people we're going to have in the future based on the allocation cap, and they plan that way. And police is doing it now, and fire has done it in the past.
Right,
Yeah.
and so
Yeah.
it goes back to what you were saying, Chief Gardner, that you're receiving this information, you've now integrated sort of your planning to that plan, so you have a sense of where those people are going to be.
Correct.
And now integrating that with, this study being done, but your regular 5-year plan.
Right.
Okay, so you're adjusting based on what the expected growth is.
Correct.
Okay.
So,
Where it's going to be is from the plans in progress, not from APFO.
Sorry, say again?
The where it's going to be is from the plans in progress, not the APFO, because APFO is not telling you where.
No, but
anymore.
from a, right.
I mean,
from
allocations, sorry.
Allocations, right.
Yeah.
No, but from a general plan perspective, we have it, and where the areas are, we know where those areas are, and they're designated and what have you. So we know there's caps in certain areas, that if you plan against the max in a year for that particular.
Right, but they're spread out through the,
Sure, no, understand that, but then the plans are what inform the exact location, but from a long-term planning perspective, that at a macro level, I think they have the information they need to be able to do things like resourcing, how many people they need, now whether those people are in the North District, South District, or in the new district that we're building. I mean, that you can adjust to trying to get to that macro level based on a plan, based on an actual number of expected growth, a maximum expected number, so.
from APFO, because it's all spread out. I mean, from
Well,
allocations, it's all spread out.
may I
Not
Right, yeah,
recommend?
I think we're agreeing, I'm just saying that
Okay, sorry.
there's at the
Yeah.
macro level, we know what the maximum number is going to be, and then at the plan level that are submitted, we know exactly where they're going to be, so the level of planning can still take place early on in the process.
Chief Gardner, with whom on your staff would our staff work to craft any potential amendment related to like that response times and what have you?
That would be our planning director, Tammy Bullough.
Okay.
Chief Gardner, can I? We're an accredited police force, correct?
Correct.
So, as an accredited force, there's standards that we have to meet.
Correct.
And I would assume that those standards are best practices from across the country,
Right,
right? And so, to be accredited, we have to meet those standards.
yes. And one of those includes an in-house assessment, workload assessment, and that's what we do every 3 years,
Okay. And how
This-
long
this
have we been
matrix-
accredited?
since 1990.
Okay. All right, so,
Okay. I was just, I see where you're going, but I guess the question is if for some reason they were no longer accredited, the time frame to become accredited, I don't know what that would, reaccredited, what would that even be?
another 3.
Would it be,
You do
would
it, you go
it,
through
or
it
could you
every
year?
correct, it? Could you correct, is it something that's correctable before that or not?
Okay, I'm not sure I understand the question. So,
Should you fall out of accreditation? Do you
Okay.
have the opportunity to correct whatever?
Yes.
And
Yes.
reapply, or have them come back and reassess, or do you have to wait for the 3-year period?
for example, we are in the process right now that we will be reviewed in April.
Okay.
And then once that assessment takes place, it goes back to the commission. And let's say, for example, they found 3 areas that we were out of compliance. That would not automatically revoke our accreditation. It could, depending on what the standards are. And then they would give us a certain amount of time to correct that, and then they would follow up with it. So then they could give you, for example, a conditional accreditation, that these will be fulfilled within a 6-month period, a 3-month period.
Okay.
Is that typical, are most police stations accredited? What percentage of police departments are accredited?
Nationwide, a small percentage.
Small percentage, okay,
In Maryland, there are a number of them.
okay.
I don't know the number.
So Chief Butler, there are,
Finished with,
thoughts, so we still?
I have
Any,
a couple
you
questions.
have a couple more questions for police?
I did. Well, this was really for Mr. Bruno, which is, I thought where Ms. Siggety was going, but in the fiscal analysis, and then you used a number for you said for the general plan, what measure did you use for that?
For police. The way we base it on calls for service. So typically, there's, more calls for service at retail, for example. So based on calls for service, and we take the current level of service or what that is and kind of get current ratio based on the current situation in the county and the current budget, and then tie a budget line item to that call for service. So it's assuming the current standard level of service is adequate based on the current budget and the current police force. And then we project that forward based on the population and the employment growth. So, retail growth would have the calls for service associated with that, and then tie that budget number to that to project the future costs.
That something you could get for us, just an explanation of how that, like the numbers or how that's calculated?
Yes, I mean, that's in the fiscal impact analysis.
Does it
for-
explain all that,
for
or that's-
downtown. It should, yeah. I
So
can
if you could just forward, yeah, that would be
I
great.
can forward that, sure.
And then
certainly.
the
Yeah.
only other question I had, I think at this point, was for Chief Gardner was, and you may have already answered this, but is there a number of stations? I understand that there's not a response time in particular, but a number of stations per population that is,
I'm not aware of
Okay.
any such formula.
I mean, and there probably is, I'm guessing, for fire. I know there is for
Right, so, I mean, it's a
libraries,
lot-
for example,
like I
but
said,
I
it's a
didn't
lot
know if the
different. I mean,
police.
the majority of our Southern District officers travel to Columbia, and that's the majority of them work beats in the Charlie and David area, which is east and west
But not a
Columbia. Then there's a
station.
portion that goes down to the Edward area, which is North Laurel.
Now, in terms of, I'm wondering if there's I mean, assume per officer you need more vehicles in terms of that type of, is there a cost associated with the increased number
For-
of people in your population that you would need? I guess it's not direct, I'll ask it later.
Okay.
Fine, thanks.
Other questions on police? Great.
No. Chief Butler, so you've been hearing the conversation around police, and so, there are 8 jurisdictions, at least according to those 2012 data, that have some sort of aspect of fire in their APFO tests. Are there certain elements that you would recommend that we should consider?
So I'm aware of the APFO tests for fire and emergency services that are represented here. They're not, to me, they're not, they're somewhat ambiguous in some cases. In many cases, they're pretty broad. So what I've learned in 3 years is Howard County Fire and Rescue is a very complex organization. I think we all know that. It's a very complex department that is career with a bargaining unit, volunteer, and some of our resources are not in Howard County. The closest engine to Lower Elkridge could be a Baltimore County engine to assist Elkridge, or in Mount Airy, or in Carroll. And so we use a lot of instruments to determine, the operation force. The general plan, I've heard a lot talked about. Fiscal analysis, the fund balance, what our fund balance is different from Chief Gardner's funding stream. DPZ, we use a lot of their forecasting. The traffic zone analysis, and like I might have already said, the contract, the collective bargaining agreement. So something could be in APFO. It doesn't have a whole lot of weight to me because it's so complex. You could take a community that grows, West Friendship. West Friendship could grow. We could have a test in here, but the volunteer force could impact what we have put in writing. They could come, you could have a resurgence of volunteers or a waxing and waning of volunteers. For words, you could put something in APFO, but the mosaic, the complexity, the department needs to be very nimble. Water. We talked a lot a couple of years ago about cisterns. The fastest water is wheeled water on wheels. So that brings in an entire conversation about apparatus. Our apparatus fleet right now is struggling. So you need, wheeled apparatus that has water is more valuable than the cisterns in the ground. But I don't want to trivialize the cisterns in the ground. We have 27 right now out west, and by the end of calendar year 2018, we'll have 35. So even in the absence of a test, it hasn't stopped fire and rescue from making progress based on the fund balance. We put 3 in this fiscal year. We're going to do, 3, and 2 over incremental in the next 18 months. So the department, in summary, as an opener, the department has to be super nimble because there's so many complexities. EMS, we have one hospital in the county, but we're working every day and dealing with 5 other hospitals that touch right outside the county. St. Agnes might be closer for many parts of Howard County, Montgomery General, and other places. So, the 4 corners of a test wouldn't give me the clearest of pictures.
I guess my question for both the chiefs, and maybe if I frame it this way, if you both opened up the newspaper tomorrow and you heard 10,000 new units are going to come to X place, what would you say, I got to call the county executive and the council, we need more of, or we need to prepare in this way to ensure that we have that adequacy?
What concerns would you
what
have?
concerns would you have?
The first question I would ask is, what's the expectation? What's the expectation in that
Excellent
community?
service.
Excellent what?
Continued
Basic
excellent
life
service.
support, advanced life support.
Where we are, not to get worse. At minimum, maintain our
Sure.
current quality of life and hopefully make it even better.
Absolutely. I
So
agree.
what would give you guys heartburn, and what would you want us, the council or the county executive, to address if you open the paper and you read that?
I'll say there's a couple things.
Oh, wait, hold on.
You can grab the mic next to you there, too. Just shift down there. There you go.
You got 3 across there, guys.
That's fine.
Again, getting to how complex this issue is. So if you're talking about a development that we're adding 10,000 people to, I would first have to take a look at what we have that surrounds that area currently. So all of our beats are not equal in calls for service in that volume. And quite frankly, it also fluctuates. So actual population, we have areas that may be more populated that has fewer calls for service than another jurisdiction. So population alone wouldn't drive that. But looking at the 10,000 units that go in there, then we would want to look at the surrounding beats there. Is there something that we would reconfigure that may help balance out that workload? And there may not be any need, or there may be a minimal need. That's something that we would have to look at in conjunction with the projections of.
I'm sorry, you might not need more officers for 10,000 more people, is that?
No, I'm saying that's something we evaluate. I can't
Okay.
say that for
All
10,000
right.
people, I need
I
3
must have
officers.
misunderstood.
I don't know
Okay.
how anyone can say that without looking at all the dynamics of where that is in the county. Is that in an area that's a heavy call volume portion of the county? I mean, there's many more things that have to be looked at. Would that be on our radar? It absolutely would be on our radar to take a look at, just as we are right now with that growth projection. And just as I said with what we're doing in Columbia with downtown, I mean, we're looking at other dynamics. So I'm not looking necessarily that it's going to be another police officer in a police car. It may be a police officer on a foot post. There may be different dynamics to that policing that we feel may be a better fit than what we're currently doing. I mean, it's very difficult to say that there's a standard. And even looking back, I mean, for all the jurisdictions we have, there's only 3 that actually have this. And I don't know that much about the planning side from what DPZ does, but I think it lends to how complex this issue really is to just come up with.
So,
Need for more if you had 6,000 people, I think is.
Right, no, I think that's what we are currently doing. We look at that and evaluate that and make recommendations to the executive each budget year.
so maybe a request, Mr. DiLorenzo, in conjunction with working with these guys. Since everybody's been pointing, to other jurisdictions, I guess, as well as, asking what would you guys want. I guess one of the things that would be helpful for me is, even though some of these, like you were saying earlier, don't apply, and some of these are very convoluted, and even if they really mean anything, some of them have other stuff behind these summaries that give you some more of that information that might.
Yeah, they're not
like-
actually tests.
Right, some are, some
Information,
aren't.
right.
Some of them don't say those numbers in here, like the Prince George's County on the police, but then if you go further in it has that information in some of the other documentation. Could you put where you guys would stand under each one of these tests currently today? And the other thing is, you guys also have your accreditation, which is one of only a handful back when we were here, so on and so forth. What accreditations you've had and since when, as well as all these other jurisdictions, because my gut is that a lot of these other jurisdictions don't even have the accreditations, even with their APFO test, that we have, but I don't know that for sure. So I guess if we could get that information, that would be helpful as well. So where we stand in each of these categories, and then accreditations for any of the jurisdictions that we have in here.
So Chief Butler, 10,000 new
Yes.
people, and you got to call the county council and the county
Sure.
executive. What are you asking for?
Good question. I liked the question even originally when you asked it. And I'll answer with a series of questions to reflect. I'll answer your one question with a series of questions that reflect the complexity of fire and rescue. Oh, wait. Oh, okay. There we go. How's this? Any better?
And for those of you who don't know, Chief Butler and I have known each other almost 20 years, and we met because when I was going through the fire academy, he was one of the people who would yell at me and make me do more push-ups.
Is that what scared you away?
And listening to him now, I'm sort of
Poetic
inclined to
justice.
do push-ups.
Sorry for all the push-ups that I made you do. So this 10,000 person, this 10,000 unit community, is it high-rise? Is it sprinklered? Is it in an area that is covered by career and volunteer? Or is it in Ms. Sigurdy's area? How close is it to mutual aid? What's my fund balance? So I just named a series of questions. Is it age restricted? What's the parking ratio and the traffic considerations? Try to distill that and synthesize it into a test, So that one headline brings forth a series of questions that we have to be nimble to address.
Right. Which actually happened during Columbia, because I made that call to you.
Yep.
What would you need? And you said, this is what I'd want. But it was very specific, but that wouldn't have been the case if it was
somewhere else.
Somewhere else, because it would have been the parking garages and everything, so.
But would
That's a great point.
Yeah, would 10,000 not indicate to you a need for anything additional? I mean, I understand that there's all this, the complexity of all those
That's
questions.
probably-
And how much additional you need, I understand. I think
Yes.
there's a really, you answered his great question with a list of other great questions. But would that not sort of indicate to you that a need for any more?
It would be a strong indicator.
Okay.
But I
Wouldn't
guess
one of
it's
the
a-
questions, though, be 10,000? Okay, we have an allocations,
Yeah, okay,
annual
yeah.
allocations cap. How many years will it take to get there? And, then what does that look like incrementally, right? Because you're not going to want you're not going to want tomorrow what you might want in 10 years.
Sure.
I mean, so I come back to the allocations, right? The
that
allocations.
and-
So.
Right.
And the macro plan versus each
Right.
incremental. Again, I guess a question on that is the planning. So Chief Gardner suggested they have their 5-year plan, and then each year they review it and they tweak it. And I imagine you have similar
Somewhat.
approach.
Somewhat. The collective bargaining agreements probably drive more of my allocations
Sure.
because it goes down to personnel on units. And also the operational strength of the volunteers. That number could be 200 this year, it could be 2,000 next year. Okay, and those are very exaggerated on both ends of that spectrum. So the allocations considerations probably strongest and more meaningful for these two gentlemen. I have to be super nimble because my department is extremely complex with a lot of variables.
Right.
Do you have a stations per population number, or is there some type of, or is it just based on location?
Historic locations. Most of these stations were what was planted in 1949, 1967, and land isn't just falling in our lap.
Right.
And locations and ideal locations. We're not a grid city, DC, Baltimore, where you find in DC one fire engine stations all over, and they have the ability to kind of grid some of their planning. You know, we're traditionally filling fire stations that were old Ellicott City, old Elk Ridge, Main Street, you know, Lisbon, West Friendship, and the like. So.
Okay, Mr. Bruno, just to Ms. Siggy's point, aren't they able to, in downtown, for example, borrow from future years? So couldn't we do more than,
Yes, they can do that in APFO. There's a clause in APFO that allows them to do that, but the downtown plan itself, that phasing chart that was set, that there was a lot of discussion on at the time, that's the built-in phasing for
but it
downtown
doesn't control
Columbia.
the number that doesn't it control what SEPAs and other things kick in? You have to have a certain amount of commercial per.
Yeah, it controls the ratio of residential
It's
to
a ratio,
commercial.
but it doesn't control
Right.
time-wise.
Controls, yeah, I guess that's a good point. Although, you know, the downtown plan has always been considered a 30-year plan. And,
It is, but there's
Yeah.
not a control on that through.
right, right.
I just going to, the question though about, the additional units and other examples. So, for example, one of the other large ones, I mean, we went through Columbia, but,
Yes.
One of the other large ones that's actually one of the things that's impacting on the school side heavily that we saw in the charts, whenever last week, was a result of Oxford Square. And so those units originally got approved and then, increased again in I think, 2012. What types of things did you have to do, if any, to account for that?
We didn't do anything for Oxford Square.
Any other questions for the chiefs? Gentlemen, thank you very much for your patience getting to this point and for the information you shared. And we think we have some specific follow-ups. I know we've tracked some of that, but thank you very much.
We'll see you tomorrow. Yeah.
What's tomorrow? Are you trying to be funny? You trying to be funny?
A little bit.
Yeah, it's called PTSD, my friend. Excellent. Excellent. Okay, so we have our school folks here, and but again, we do have our two folks from Public Works that we can ask a couple of questions. Again, I just really have one macro question, and it may have some other feedback, but I think this will be rather short if we can. Go for it. Okay. All right, so Mr. Evanson, Mr. DeLuca, if you don't mind, we'll, again, as I said earlier, both gentlemen have been fixtures of our hearings and have yet to have the opportunity to weigh in on some of the considerations. Thank you very much. So as you're getting settled in, grab a microphone there, Mr. DeLuca. I guess general question, similar to the questions you've heard already, and sort of with what other jurisdictions do, does it make sense for what we do for a specific APFO-related test or component to be related to stormwater, and then with what we do already in the development process, or I guess it seems to me we're already doing things that would prevent development from moving forward, short of meeting those or being compliant with those requirements. So if you can start with the comparison with other jurisdictions or your sense of how other jurisdictions approach this.
Well, I'll start. When when stormwater came up in the committee hearings, I went back, looked at some of our neighboring jurisdictions in Maryland. You may have also, but my recollection was that the majority, once you got into what they were really requiring, was items that are already pretty much taken care of by our code and the design manual and the development regs themselves. So
What sense?
that we require storm drains and stormwater management And some of the counties are more rural than others, and so they had this APFO requirement for the developers to put in the stormwater and some of that infrastructure that wasn't there, that wasn't necessarily part of their code. So I think that it represented more. I think that some of the jurisdictions that I looked at, and maybe you've seen some others that I would like to hear about, but
You've looked, obviously, you were part of this, you were
Right.
part of that, but so as it relates to, are you saying, so as it relates to like Anne Arundel and St. Mary's, which are sharing the language, that's stuff that is covered within our code anyway, just not broken out separately in AFO?
correct. Yes, it's not part of a test, but it is part of the overall code, the overall planning, and the development regs.
So I don't know if you were here, I wasn't looking back there to see who was back there. You know, one of the things that might be helpful again is, you know, if you look at these and just point out where they're addressed elsewhere in our code, if at all, as well as anything that we have beyond that.
Mhm.
If you can just do that, you know, as it relates to each of the ones that we have.
So,
Well, I'd have to get back to you on that.
Oh, I know,
I'm
no,
glad
no,
to do
do it
that.
right now.
No, it was a homework assignment.
Okay,
Actually,
that's what I want.
Mr. Fox, since you've come back to that request a couple of times, Mr. DeLorenzo's in the office, he's taking notes. Another column on the chart, you know, the one that was used to identify where applicable, whether or not, you know, we have existing code, or code's stronger or non-existent, whatever it might be. I think that's where Mr. Fox is going, and you know, to the extent that you can do it for the areas that are covered here, that would be extremely.
And I think it'll help us, and I think it will help the public as well.
Yeah, no,
because-
absolutely. Ms. Sadie?
So I just wanted to make sure that my recollection is accurate. But when we did the general plan, as there was discussion about adequate public facilities, and we talked about water and sewer. And so we have one water treatment plant, and based on the general plan that exists today, we have capacity in that plant, correct?
We do,
Yes.
yes.
Okay, so that as each time the general plan then comes up for review and description of what, you know, what our growth plan may be, we have to take into account the adequacy of our wastewater treatment plant in terms of being able to handle waste, at least.
Correct. And if
Correct.
there is a major general plan amendment, then
And we
it
do the
needs to
same
be
thing.
evaluated as well.
Right.
Right,
And we,
it's for all intents and purposes, there's a test against.
right,
Right.
right. And we actually did a test on the water treatment plan, if I recall correctly, when we changed the zoning around Duregan, because it was going to allow additional significant housing there. So when there's significant things,
Right.
that's looked at, because we have finite capacity.
Correct.
Yeah.
And the reason why, and from my understanding, water and sewer stood alone was because it was put in place well before the county ever adopted an APFO. So there was a recognition many, many years ago that we needed to be very planful with water and sewer. And even more so now, because we're not only interested in the number of gallons, but we're interested in the nutrient loading.
Right.
So that was highly defined early on, even before there was an APFO.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful to come back to that question that we just asked Mr. DiLorenzo to facilitate. Because in my review of at least a couple of the two that Mr. Fox brought up, Anne Arundel, St. Mary's, they seem to be consistent with our existing code, if our code's not actually stronger, but just, so from what I understand, in some situations that you've evaluated, they have it in AFO because they don't have corresponding code, and that's why it might be documented as such for them.
Correct.
Okay.
Right, but we also have the plan for water and sewer.
Sure, right.
Related.
Right.
Right, so that comes to the council on a regular basis for updating. So there are other mechanisms other than APFO in relation to these two at least.
Exactly, that are related, but, yeah. Colleagues, Ms.
For that-
Teresa?
The question is whether the county resources can keep up with it, not whether it's, I mean, I understand it's regulated in other areas, and we look at it in that capacity, but I think that in terms of adequate public facilities, that's a slightly different question.
Well, I get that, but I think that the way we do development in Howard County is that the water and sewer, except for the water treatment plant and large water projects that benefit all sorts of folks in the county, the actual laying of the appropriate infrastructure is the responsibility of whoever is building whatever they're building.
That's correct, yes.
That's closer, yeah, sorry.
Why do you all think that so many other jurisdictions have some element of water and sewer in their APFO and we don't?
There can be a lot of different reasons. I'm not sure if it's many.
I'm looking at it, it's many.
Yeah. Some jurisdictions, they don't have their own utility. For example, in Montgomery and Prince George's, they use WSSC. St. Mary's has a co-op that's really not part, it's a quasi-government agency in St. Mary's County.
The ones who have them are Anne Arundel, Baltimore County, Carroll, Charles, Frederick, Hartford, Montgomery, Prince George's, Queen Anne's, St. Mary's, and Washington.
Yeah, and on the Eastern Shore, like Queen Anne's, for example, they have a mid-county block of a co-op of the mid-shore counties that share in those costs. So there are all different mechanisms of how they provide the service, and so they're not necessarily always in control, and because it's a much larger group that they need to deal with. So there are different ways to accomplish the same thing. Fortunately for us, we own our treatment plant, and if we have to borrow from someone, like if some of it goes to a different treatment plant, then we have to have MOUs, similar to Baltimore County and
What do you mean if we
Baltimore
have to
City.
borrow from someone?
If for some reason there was a problem with capacity, then that it's potentially, like for example, water. We get probably 90 to 95% of our water from Baltimore City, but we also have arrangements with WSSC where we can obtain more water if need be. So I'm not the resident expert on water and sewer.
Yes,
but
you are, Mark.
I will only go about that far. That's the extent of my knowledge. And so if you have questions, if you really want to delve into water and sewer, then I think that there might be someone, Art Shapiro could be here to describe that, or Jim could be here to describe that. But I think that, the basic understanding that I think that I'm giving you is that there are many ways to accomplish the service, and a lot of counties have developed their ways specific to them. Fortunately for Howard County, we have our treatment plant, and we're in control of that, and we have a very good planning mechanism.
And I guess that'll go back to the same question and adding this, and it's a little bit different in this particular case, because it's just how do we currently do it elsewhere is really probably the answer versus on the water and sewer versus the compliance, because most of this has to do with, is it, how they're determining whether it's available or not. And it's not, they're very basic statements, and it's not stuff referring in most cases to too many other things, but just like I think you and Councilwoman Siggety were saying before, we have that finite capacity on the treatment side, not necessarily on the water side as much, but on the treatment side. I mean, that's already addressed. I mean, people, they just can't, that shuts things off. It's even almost stronger than something that's AFFO that's going to allow something to get overridden or something over time. We just don't have it. So unless we add something in our general plan to build a new wastewater treatment plant, which would be a whole nother thing, that's cut off, that's it, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Yeah, and I think what we've asked in terms of evaluation against our current code, and we'll help address whether or not we've got it covered somewhere else. But any specific questions? And we expanded the scope of your testimony. But anything else on the topics we covered, stormwater? Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you, gentlemen, very much. Appreciate you taking the time. Okay, colleagues, so we're going to ask, do we have our friends left, or have they taken off? There you are. I'm sorry, I didn't see you in the back corner. Yeah, no, not at all. Not at all. Come on back. And then, colleagues, we did, in the anticipation that we were going to be here for a few hours, there is lunch. It is in the conference room. So I figure if we can at least address the question that was posed right before.
And the reason why, one of the reasons
you.
why I asked it is if you look at the.
And Dr. Ball, can you, if you wouldn't mind, just read?
Yeah, I'll restate.
Yeah.
My question was, can you, for the public, walk us through from open-close chart to, we're going to tell developer, you can't develop because the school area is closed? One of the reasons why I wanted to have that conversation is most people have no clue. Another is we've been talking around it. And a third, if you look at the APFO comparisons around jurisdictions, almost all of them have percentages, and we have, as our adequate public facilities provision under schools, open-close chart defined by school region approved by council. So that is, according to this chart, the way that APFO is managed through the schools. So can you just walk us through that process?
Sure. Adequate public facilities in the chart is actually at the end of our process. So everything that our office produces is guided by the implementation procedures and also policies of 6010. It was recently revised in January, and our process always starts with our enrollment projections, which identifies any kind of capital improvements. So our enrollment projections, our feasibility study, and our adequate public facilities charts are all tied together with our capital improvements. So when the feasibility study comes out in June, it's actually informing the following year's capital budget. So for example, the 2017 is informing the 2019. The adequate public facilities chart that ends this series will come out in 2018 and will be adopted by the Board of Education, actually not adopted, but passed through them onto the County Council in 2018. So that's the end of our process, the APFO charts that are produced by our office, because it needs to know the capital improvements that are going to be funded in the budget that it's tied to. That's why there's APFO-like charts and then the actual APFO charts, because they're reliant upon the capital improvements that are going to be set in through the capital budget. So, for example, our APFO-like charts in the 2017.
Are you saying APFO light?
Like,
Oh, APFO like?
L-I-K-E. So they're in the back of the feasibility study. They are the red, green, blue charts that we produce in order to show cause and effect, essentially. Cause would be the existing conditions if we did nothing. Effect would be if we added capital improvements, if we have redistricting. That's post measures. Pre-measures are the existing conditions, and that's how we identify them in our feasibility study. So an example of assumptions built in the feasibility study, which actually inform the capital budget from our perspective, are additions to schools like Dunlogan and Ellicott Mills Middle School, right? They are in our feasibility study as a necessary capital improvement to target specific schools that need relief at the middle school level. There's not necessarily a need all around for a brand new middle school, but there are certain targeted areas that we need additional seats. So that recommendation is in our feasibility study. It got translated over into our capital budget request. That said, because of capital funding constraints, those projects that we say we need in the feasibility study by 2020, I believe is what we put in the feasibility study, it might be 2021, are legitimately not going to be funded and open for a year or two after that. So that's kind of the reason why we do APFO-like charts in the feasibility study, to say we are assuming that well, we know we need this addition. We're assuming that it can be put into this particular year for this particular capital budget. However, through the capital budget process, the actuality is that those improvements really won't come online until, I believe, 2022, based on our proposal. Now, after the capital improvement process happens, it might be 2023. I don't know because that's online. So that's our basic process from school planning side. And once we know what all of that looks like in May, in terms of the capital budget and when certain things come online, because again, the APFO chart is 3 years out. So what improvements are coming online 3 years out that we're testing against? And so that's how we produce our APFO charts for county council adoption.
That was a really big nutshell.
You asked for our process, but that's what it is.
So to Ms. Sigady's point before about your controlling, I didn't follow the point entirely, so I don't know if you have a response to it or if that we can talk further about that. But what is it, how do you guys control the numbers?
What informs the APFO chart? What informs the APFO chart is
Well-
our projections. That
Projections of,
student enrollment.
right, but that's based on our development numbers.
Yes. So our office pretty soon will be getting another chart for projected development, housing development. That is one of many pieces of information that informs our projections. So my office works with Jeff's office, and he informs us of any housing projections by year, by attendance area. We input that information into our projection model, and that is one of many pieces of data that informs our projection, again, because we look at the attendance area level. And our projections that we generate are specific to the attendance area. So while we do have countywide projections for new development overall, we see different effects at the attendance level area. So those yields, number of students based off those housing units, can vary at the attendance level area.
And you are the ones, based on historical data, that come up with the current
Correct.
yeah.
Yeah, we look at our
Didn't
past, we look at our past to derive our future. So we look at historical 5-year averages. We do what's called a best fit. And so.
What's that mean?
Either a 1-year or 3-year or 5-year average. It depends on a lot of different data points, but we look to see if a certain area is growing really fast, and it's kind of like just in the last year, maybe then that 1-year average is not good to inform the
Oh, okay.
future.
Just in terms
essentially.
of looking at what data you're looking at, but that's not you're not making policy decisions there. At that
No.
point, all you're doing is using the
Data to inform the
data to
decision.
inform the decisions.
But it informs the yield rate that you then use to
Yes.
determine
Yes.
the potential.
Effect from it's new housing construction. It is our cohort survival. So that is a student that enters in the system in kindergarten, and the likelihood that child is going to go straight through 12th grade in Howard
Which is like
County.
the worst term ever.
I know. I'm going to blame demographers on that one. I am not the one that came up with that
Right.
term, but that is a
Cohort
survival.
completion? I mean, really?
Do
is
you,
that
it
hard
it
to-
literally is the likelihood of a child going from completing the whole school
So it's your
system.
best estimates as to what a
Yes.
development will produce.
Yeah, so we have cohort survival, so that's what a child comes into the system, however, K through 12. Then we also use new construction yield. We use housing resales. We use apartment turnover. We also look to the state to get birth data, actual birth data and projected birth data. So all of these points inform our enrollment projections. we look at the past to inform the future. So for example, if by chance a new development is yielding higher number of students than we predicted, then those students inform the next year's enrollment. So the yield might go a little higher, not maybe a whole percentage, but maybe a 0.2 or 0.3 or what have you. So our past informs our future. And so that's why we do our enrollments every year, because certain things change. Like, for example, Laurel Racetrack was predicted to come online one year, but it hasn't happened yet. So every year that we get our housing projections from the county, we push that back. So then that's why projections fluctuate. Things like the economy also kind of hinder our ability to do projection, because then mobility is restricted because people might not be reselling their houses as much. So those economic influences, we don't have a very good way of predicting those. Other things that can change our projections are land use decisions done by county council. So at one point, there was a higher projected amount of growth in the western part of the county. Well, then state laws mandated the tiering system, and also there was the comprehensive plan. So those changes, too, also will affect our projections.
But all calculations, not policy decision.
Yeah,
Okay.
calculation, not policy decision.
But in the open-closed chart, which is the end product, because it has to take into account whatever gets passed in the budget.
Correct.
And then whatever redistricting is done.
Correct.
So those two are, in fact, policy decisions.
Yes, those two policy decisions.
And so
do.
they are
Which two are
factored
they?
in.
They're the
Redistricting
redistricting,
and capital improvement, what's being budgeted.
but that's also, like, we play a role in that capital piece as well. Right.
At the end, right. We do not play a role in looking at the resources that the board has, looking at their open and closed chart, going through their feasibility study and making decisions about where to move in relation to what their Office of Planning is telling them.
It goes down to being about redistrict, whether they make, what decisions they make about redistricting, not other ways to control.
Oh, I think
that
it
chart.
has a lot to do also, though, with their capital budget choices. Because in fact, they could choose to, instead of doing systemic renovations, they could choose to do new schools, right? They could put a whole bunch of stuff on hold and say the most important thing we have to do is build new schools, and so therefore we are not going to do portions of the systemic renovation budget. And the systemic renovation program is as detailed as their capital program and their CIP as well. And so it's all well thought out, but those are decisions that are made not by us. They're made by the board. And as you'll recall, our relationship with the board then has to deal with the county executive, and then perhaps there's an opportunity for us to have a relationship with the board based on state law, but it's their decision. We can't substitute our decisions for theirs. That's their job. We can support them in it.
Right, but we can still change the number in our percentage numbers in a way that would be helpful or not to them.
I don't think so.
I
I
don't know how
don't
that
think
could
so.
not
We
be
can
helpful to
change the
you.
numbers if we want to shut down the opportunity for people to use their land for a longer period of time or sooner. But the numbers that we would come up with, they have full control of their own numbers. They don't need us in this. And the way APFO is built, we need them.
Well,
Hold
I
on,
think it's a relation,
Yeah.
it is a relationship. We obviously, we need you, we're here. Is that when, I'm going to take this in two chunks. One is that, yes, we have capital projects, and that informs our decision as far as what the utilization is going to be in the open-closed chart. But again, those decisions are being made at a specific point in time. As you well know, capital budgets change. Our priorities change. One administration may give us $60 million. The next might be $40 million. So again, things are moving up and down. Things move up and down this list. So we're trying to balance all of that. In addition to, what do we do when the children are coming? Because the challenge that we have at the school system is that when a child comes to the school system, we have to give them a seat, we have to give them a desk, and we have to give them an education. We cannot stop them at the school door and say, I'm sorry, we're at 125% capacity, we cannot educate you. What I believe we've been doing as a system is that we have been accommodating and mitigating and using short-term mitigation, such as relocatable classrooms, as long-term mitigation stopping. And as a community, again, we are hearing that conversation of that's not somewhere where our community wants to be. So we have to say, okay, so if we're going to take that off the table, what do we do now? What do we need? Obviously, we need money, but we also need time, because the growth aspect, there are so few factors in this process on both sides of the aisle that we can control. We can control the growth. So what we're saying is, obviously, we want people to come to Howard County. It's an amazing place. We want to educate their children, but we want to have a seat that is going to provide the best education possible for that child. And we're finding that that means not having large class sizes, not having relocatables and doing that. So in addition, again, it's that dance and the relationship between the time to give us more time to figure this out so that we can continue to look at our numbers, so that the best thing we want to do is give you the best possible numbers so we can all inform the best possible decision. And again, time and money are those two factors that we never have enough of, but we all need in order to come to the best solution.
I think we're all pretty much in that same place. I think the divergence of perspectives is at what points and who has certain accountability and responsibility for the time and the money, and what is done with the time and the money. For example, what are the requests that are made to, during the board process and the superintendent process to the county executive? What is done with that time as far as these new programs like is it Jumpstart?
Jumpstart.
Like Jumpstart or redistricting, or saying, okay, well, now that we have time, we need to find a school site. Or now that we have time, we're going to wait until the time elapses and we're not going to do anything. So I think we're all in a similar place with the time and money, but it's a matter of how do we practically implement a plan, and in today's conversation through APFO, to ensure that we actually meet our goal of, like you said, having that high-quality educational experience, not only for our students and families, but for our educators.
Dr. Ball, I think you were going as well with this sort of shared, I think you were talking about this as well, Ms. Sadie, the shared responsibility, and you said it very well, right? That there are certain elements we can affect, and the question is, how do we balance it between both sides? Because quite honestly, it's got to be also shared accountability, right? So making sure that you're using all the tools that are squarely in your purview, and we're using all the tools squarely in our purview, but that in that intersection, that we're also making sure that we don't, one side doesn't get off easy on which tools they're using. Well, that tool's uncomfortable to use, so I'm not going to do that this year. We'll let them use their tool that they don't like using. So it is that sort of that balance, and the confluence of redistricting has highlighted that there's been an imbalance in terms of the conversation, and there's a need to make a rebalancing and sort of the ratios and the metrics we're using. I think that's what you're trying to get to, Dr. Ball, in terms of what is that number where we're all working together and holding each other accountable, and making sure that when the public comes to us, that we're all responsive to to their specific requests.
Mr. Weinstein, I
Yeah,
think there's
specifically.
also something here that when we're looking at it, when this discussion that we're having right now is being looked at through the lens of people with children in school. It's not being looked at through any other lens. We haven't talked about any of the other lenses that it might be viewed through, right? So and I don't know the numbers anymore, Mr. Brownell, but there was a point in time where we basically said that approximately 30 to 35% of our households had kids in school. And and I was thinking about this morning. Don't anybody take me wrong when I say this, because I believe that educating our children is the most important thing that we do. But we have a responsibility to use our resources wisely. So we're looking at it from the perspective of, in this conversation, 35, let's even up it to 40% of our population, not the rest of our population. And there's certainly, I have heard over time, because one of our jobs is land use, we have heard from folks who own property that would like to sell that property for development, and they are extraordinarily frustrated because the school that their property is in is over capacity when the school right next door is way under capacity. And so I don't know what to say to them then either, right? Because what we haven't done is to balance our resources. So the question then is, where do we have, if in fact we don't control redistricting, but yet we can see that there would be opportunity for redistricting and for rebalancing the assets that would then allow for other property owners to be able to move forward with something that they wanted to do. Where is that balance in all of this? And I think that that's an important aspect of thinking about APFO too. It's not one-sided. APFO has to meet the needs of all of our community. So how does it do that?
Probably the best example of that is the folks who come in and talk about roads and congestion and things like that, and that's, I mean, certainly
Right.
something we need to look at.
Well, and folks who've come in to
Right.
talk about needing to meet an elementary school region test when the school that their property is in is
Open.
and open significantly, right? So there are those things. And so we're not growing nearly at the rate that we were when we actually created APFO these many years ago. And I also think we have to take that into account. And it goes back to what Mr. Brownell said about our growth cap that we put into place. And
Can I ask Mr. Brown, what Ms. Siggety threw out, number from 30 to 40%, do you have that number in terms
So
of
was
the
your
percentage of households
Households
with?
that have, I think it might be lower than that. I can look.
No, okay. I
think-
didn't know if
I
that's
think-
something
yeah,
you
I
had looked
think
at
it might even
recently.
be- Yeah.
well, I was going to, so back in the
yeah.
day, Mr. Brownell, when I was on the Board of Ed,
That's what it was. It could be,
we
right.
threw that one,
Yeah.
and, just basically this one-third, two-thirds.
Right, well, then the county's population is aging, right?
Yes,
So the
it
average
is.
size is going up, and so of course, there's still a lot of families because of the excellent school system. So,
Right.
the county's attracting new
Yeah.
families moving
Right.
in. But you
And-
do have an aging dynamic,
And
so
our
over
children,
time,
our
this could change.
baby boomer children are having children, so yes, we have
Right.
another bubble.
Yes.
So.
Not mine, thank God.
With you there.
Mr. Fox, you had your green light
Oh.
on. Okay. All right, sorry.
I was going
Yeah,
to say,
someone small.
Siggety, your point is very well taken. I don't envy us, but I certainly don't envy you in dealing with these challenges. But as we all know, schools are an investment in the community, and we are a victim of our own success, which I'd rather have it's not a bad problem to have. But the other challenge we have, and this goes to your point, which is that unfortunately, the way it doesn't always work out that the land exists where the growth is needed. And we see that especially in the West versus the East. And that's one of the challenges that we have. If you look at the master plan, where we have the revitalization in the growth areas, we have some of our schools that are over capacity in those areas. So unfortunately, it's this, how do we take this confluence and figure out how can we make better decisions in the future? And to the making better decisions in the future, I am hopeful that we as a school system, and I'm speaking as one member, that we can provide better information that will inform your decisions and our decisions, and have an even a more improved conversation with our folks on the county side, so that when we're looking at schools and we're looking at our areas, maybe there's a different way to get other information to come in, so that, okay, well, how much land is not developed? How much of that land is potentially to be developed? And maybe, again, I know the last thing you want probably is another data point, but again, are
But I
there
think they
other
have those
data
data
points?
points. I mean, that's the information I know we see regularly. I mean.
Right, that was the information, we have that in detail. We know all of the undeveloped land of the county. We know when development's coming in terms of the short-term stuff based on plans that have been submitted. We do our best to estimate long-term where development could have come based on the allocation system.
And those estimates,
So
if I'm not, because we went through this when looking at constraints on development in the watershed, so I know we went down to the parcel
right,
level
yes, yeah.
here. I believe your assumptions are liberal in terms of you assume that if development could occur, it will occur.
Right,
Based on the
right.
existing zoning at the time, so like if it's as dense as it can get, that's what you assume. You don't take out, you don't do an analysis saying, oh, these are steep slopes in this particular parcel, so instead of, 50 units, there can only be 30. You assume that every available spot on that parcel is built. So your estimates for the out years, the far out years where you don't have plans submitted for developable land, is that the most amount of units can be put on that
We
property.
try to average things like environmental steep slopes and floodplains, but in general, I think your point is correct. We're generally probably very prudent, and I would say conservative in terms of our allocations and the timing. We probably assume that when we do the projections, the earliest this development could happen, and it probably is conservative, meaning that on average it may not happen that quickly. You want to be prudent, but not overly prudent, because we don't want to plan for more units than are actually going to be there. But we also do it, given that if a plan comes in, those units could be there, but the market could be such that things are delayed. And that's an example that Renee mentioned with Laurel Park Station. We've been planning for those units
And that was
for a
an
long
economic,
time.
that was a downturn.
Downturn in the economy. So we're always kind of expecting what could happen if everything was in good condition as far as the market's concerned.
Right.
Well, what I meant by that is that to provide that data by the school region, so that, because I know it is a data point that is within the open and closed chart as far as what we look at, but it's a different picture, so to speak, if we can show, here's the area, and explain, okay, so that you can visually look at it and say, oh, okay, wow, okay, there's a lot of land there. Wow, there is a lot of developable land here. There's developable land here. There's developable land here. I think that would help, I know from a board perspective, that would help better inform my decision-making and my understanding and the anticipation as far as, are we thinking about this? Are we looking towards the future? Because again, as you had said at previous meetings, we don't want to overbuild our schools.
No,
we
we
want to
can't.
be, we can't. I mean, it's not good policy no matter how you cut it. So again, it's that where do we find the sweet spot of doing it? which
Mr.
is-
Brown, I'm sorry, you wanted to?
Okay, we have that's a very good point, and we can share with you a land use map that has all of that information on it, where future growth is anticipated for the next 30 years.
And if we can
Yeah.
take that data
Uh-huh.
and then also not only have it in a map, which is lovely, but also have it in a chart form so that we can have the areas and we could look and people can have a better understanding. Because I think part of the challenge is that we hear from our parents, your constituent, we all hear from people going, well, heck, I was driving and then next thing I knew, where there are townhouses, coming up like mushrooms. So I think, again, to me, the more information we have available, not only for those of us who are making these decisions, but also for our community so that they have an anticipation and they have an understanding of this is what our Howard County looks like. And then we can continue to move forward and make better decisions.
Right, I think that feeds well into the process, which falls squarely in our lap, is the general plan process, right? And where we will look at, and I think to your point, if the trend is we're aging, that's a known trend. I feel it every day. And that as we
do
look
I.
forward.
It keeps trending, right?
Yeah, it keeps trending, let's hope so. But that the next general plan may be one that looks at something that we can lower we're lowering allocations, we're doing other things to reflect the fact that there's not much developed land, we're not growing in the same fashion that we are. But that's our process, and then it sort of provides a context for you to operate in as well, as you're looking at your long-term plans. But I would hope that in the next, because this is the next council's responsibility, I believe the next council would come and do, that they would actively engage the Board of Education, the school system in that process as well, which I would imagine the last time it was as well, so.
Because that's another one of the challenges that we have as a community is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, other jurisdictions, when they do their master plans or their plans, they actually factor in school sites into that. So they take that piece. I mean, we've kind of separated it. I think it's time for us to have a little bit of a trial marriage maybe and sort of see how we can help inform that decision as well, because that may provide us, I'm being optimistic, less heartache in the future when it comes to how we're planning how you're planning your allocations, how we're planning our schools, so that if we have an area where you say, okay, we need to revitalize, I'm going to use the West as an example. Okay, we're going to have to, we want to put more housing here. Okay, there is no, we have a school there, but if we go to X number of units, and this is where we're going to want to give our allocations, we're going to have to think now about putting the schools there.
Right, well,
So just a different
I
way
think,
of-
I think Ms. Sigley was probably prepared for me to do what I'm about to do to her. And that is, as the person who, on the council, who's also served on the Board of Education and gone through both these processes, I think it's a very good point in terms of understanding the where can we put schools. We have a land bank where there are certain potential locations and the like, but if you could comment, I think
Well,
with your experience here. I know you can comment.
I can comment. I can, comment back to the beginning of Columbia and point out that 14,000 acres, there were school sites set aside because, in fact, that was part of the plan. I can comment back to a redistricting that I'm very familiar with, that Mr. Fox is also very familiar with, which was the opening of Reservoir High School. I was not yet on the Board of Education at that particular point in time, but I had the distinct pleasure of chairing the very first Citizens Advisory. And I had the responsibility, Mr. Weinstein, the entire committee gave me the responsibility to walk into the Board of Ed and tell them, under no circumstances should you build Marriott's Ridge High School. We have looked at the general plan, where it is, right. Oh, yeah, no, we knew we needed the 12th high school, but we had already looked at the general plan, we'd done all of the work, and I had the pleasure of being able to, going in and saying that. The other pleasure I had going in to say, because they sent me in to say again, which was, we can't redistrict your high schools or give you any good advice until you tell us where the regional programs are going to be. As you look at this, we're seeing regional programs all over the place, and you've got to make decisions about that. Then we can give you our best advice. We gave the best advice we could. Mr. Fox had best advice at the time, and the board made their decisions at the time. But the board also chose to build Marriott's Ridge High School where it was. Bottom line, Mr. Weinstein, I honestly believe that had the board taken the time to understand the general plan, they wouldn't have done it. What they were seeing at the time were housing developments being built in the West, but what they hadn't done was look at what the total was supposed to be. It was a quick build, and so they didn't look at what the total should be. So again, there's overlap here, but there's also, as we look at what the general plan is and how it directs our development, I think that we're much better, our data's much better.
Sure.
We share it much better than we did at the time. We also have a cap, and the cap has been reducing. And we also have,
What cap have been reducing?
yeah, it used to be 2,000. It's now down to 1850.
1850.
But that's
And-
because
and-
that doesn't count downtown, so it's actually higher.
correct, all right. If you want to go down that road, yes. But
I
that
mean,
was a
there's the
very
people.
special project.
But there's
And
still
so-
more people.
I understand.
Okay.
So just for the
But he wanted me to comment, so I did.
I guess
Sorry,
I just
can't help
want to
myself.
make sure I'm clear on timeline and where you wanted to go.
Yeah,
Mr. Weinstein.
no, thank you very much, Dr. Ball. And so, yeah, I'll just wrap up your comment if I can, because I think there's an intersection with what you were saying, Ms. Delmont Small, and what you're saying, Ms. Siggety, in terms of, in the overlap of the different things that we own, that you own, there are definitely opportunities for improved and increased communication and planning, more importantly, planning it and the increase in data, improvement in the software and the systems that we're using to analyze the data that we can definitely do better. So to your question, Dr. Ball, we have gone through, I guess more formally, all the different elements in that chart we were working off, sort of like the way I looked at it, was like a scorecard of topics related to APFO, the things that were presented in the task force. Well, who won? It was a
Wait.
tie.
So are we finished with schools, and you're saying we're finished with other topics? Is that where we are?
I am just giving a quick summary. If you
Okay.
let me finish, I'm trying to answer Dr. Ball's question. So in terms of getting the information exchanged, we've gone through all the topics at least once, schools obviously more than once. And so it's sort of, the way I look at it is we're in overtime. And so we can, what I'd like to suggest, maybe take a break, come back. I believe Mr. Lorenzo provided us a bunch of information yesterday. We can review some of the information he provided. Mr. Edmondson, who's left, but he can come back. He had an answer to a roads question that we had all asked. So we can then start going into back to other topics, based on what folks are interested in. Mr. Fox.
I can wait till after break, but I
Yeah.
could also potentially, if it'd be okay, ask two questions not to be answered now, but to
Okay.
be answered after break to give them time to.
Okay, yeah, no,
think
please,
about
go ahead.
that.
Go ahead.
So one of the things, and we had talked about a little bit the last time, is I guess I wouldn't mind going through, especially with these elementary schools that were either overcrowded in 13 and still in 16, or how they got to being overcrowded in 16. Just sort of, what got to that point? What allowed it, what failed potentially, or what decisions were made, or what could have been changed? Because, we were talking about guessing about a lot of things. We actually have some specific things. Again, I don't want to answer right now, so.
Are you
but to
suggesting
go-
that the school system stay to answer after our break?
Yeah, and Mr. Brownell as well, if that's okay. If we'll be short, but I think it would be helpful to everybody, unless you can handle it on your own. I'm
Well, no,
fine with
I
that,
mean, I
too. think it
provided
would
those
be-
charts, but I think built into those charts are a lot of programmatic changes that I don't
Yeah,
know.
no,
So
right,
that would be
exactly,
helpful.
and
That'd be
that's what I think is important for everybody to understand, but I want to give you time to go look at everything, so it'll save, I think,
Do you
make it
need to phone a
easier.
friend?
And then the other
Somebody-
one.
No, I'm serious, if there's somebody else from a programmatic standpoint, if there's some things, I don't know.
And
Ms.
the
Delmont
other
Small
one
I
is-
wouldn't want to put her in the position of answering questions like
And
that.
then the other one is to, give some thought. I mean, I hear everything it's been saying about the schools test for the high school, and I understand, a lot of that, especially as you look at some of the numbers both in neighboring schools and the regions and everything else up there in Long Beach and Howard. But as we heard this morning in the talk about the Jump Start program and other things, and there's other ways to address, I mean, if we were to put that type of test in, how would it get applied how would you apply it based off of other programs potentially being there where people can shift schools? So how would you guide us in how that would be done? So those are my two just to think about and give a little bit of time to think about.
Yeah.
On the regional issue that
I'm
just keeps
sorry,
coming.
yeah, on a-
Well, just the regional, Ms. Siggety said something about regional programs. I don't know if you guys understood that, because I wasn't clear exactly on which regional programs. Are we talking about the high school regional programs? Or you're
No,
talking-
any.
But aren't the other regional programs, we know where they are? It's not, I thought what was
Yeah,
said
but they
was-
may have changed or shifted, and that may have been part of the cause.
Well, aren't those regional programs, particularly in elementary school, put where they're needed?
No, you're
Not, sometimes it's originally where there was space, and they might move, I'll answer.
It depends. But one of the later moves that we just added to a school was because that school had particular space. We had two programs that were two special needs programs that were over capacity at their existing locations. And so we added a new regional program in order to help the overflow, essentially, of that particular program at a school that was under capacity and had the room capability to start that program at that particular school. So there are instances where that happens.
Not being put where it's crowded. They're either put where they're needed or where there's space.
In some instances, yes. Like if, I would have to go back at other schools to see where they're placed. Regional pre-K is a different beast all in itself, pardon the word. We do put regional pre-Ks where they're needed most because there are regional programs.
Right.
But the specialized programs like ALS and rec, they're generally, some of the rec are housed with the regional pre-Ks. But some are also put in schools that have the capacity to take on those programs because their projections are low and they have the space. So it's very case by case dependent.
Okay.
And actually even, I mean, because some of that even applies even with some of the things that could be there at the elementary school or middle school level that might be, some of them are not by choice, some might be overtime or now or whatever,
Yeah.
if that ends up playing into.
Well, I think to your point about the high school, so that there's a greater mobility, and Jumpstart being an example, we have ROTC and other types of things. So, okay, so we're at 1 o'clock. Colleagues, 30-minute break. Does that sound sufficient? 30? Yeah, no, and then, yeah. Yes, thanks. So we'll back at 1:30 then. Okay. All right, we good? Ms. Hightower, we good? Okay, excellent. All right, so Ms. Kamens, who has been extremely generous with her time today, is not going to be so generous for much longer. She has to go. So we'll try and get, and I think these questions may require some additional time than you have right this moment, but if we can just start to approach them. There were two points here, sort of the some of the reasoning behind the overcrowding in elementary schools in comparison with 2013, 2016, and then a high school test relative to programmatic changes. So, no, that was the two questions that
Those were
Greg
the two
asked right at the
questions.
end. No,
I
disregard.
I am not a
this.
magician. I am under some severe time limits right now, so I'll give it a stab. So I provided to the Board of both Board of Education and County Council yesterday afternoon a comparison chart of our capacities. So some of those questions that you have are actually on this chart. So I think it was attachment 2 of your. It might. I don't know where it is, but it was attachment 2 when I sent it over. It looks like this. It's a chart. It's attachment 1. So it's a 2-pager. The first page is, and I apologize for this being in draft form, but this is a capacity chart, yeah. But we're still going back through time. We just chose 2009 primarily because that's when the facility assessment was done at Howard County Public Schools. So there's a good breaking point in order to have an apples to apples comparison as to how we capture capacity. It literally says attachment 1. Yeah. So that is showing all of our elementary, middle, and high school capacities since 2009. And again, the reason being is because we had our facilities evaluated in 2008 by Gilbert and another architect, I believe, don't quote me on it as well before my time. And they did a facility assessment, and then there were multiple reports that came afterwards that the board considered to adjust their capacities. The second chart actually is right behind it is the second page of it. It's in color. It shows yellow and green. So it basically runs through all of the changes to capacity from 2009. And it shows sort of where any capacity changes occurred. So for example, if you look at the elementary schools, Councilmember Fox, in 2014, we did a reevaluation of all of our spaces based on the facility study that was done in 2008, and then moving forward. So all of the changes at that time frame relative to the elementary schools were related to that study. So if you want specifics as to why it happened.
Right, and that's a great, I mean,
Yeah.
that was one I wasn't even actually, totally thinking about, but like Talbot Springs is the, I think
Correct.
we may have talked about as a perfect example.
So, yeah, perfect
where it
example
went
is
to,
Talbot Springs.
443 to 377, only 2 homes or whatever were built,
Exactly.
and it became over capacity.
So there's two things. The capacity was reevaluated, and then the second thing, we added a regional pre-K to that program. It's not reflected on this chart,
Right.
but that did occur. And so therefore, since we were adding
that should-
the regional pre-K, we subtract out those spaces
Oh,
because
you did subtract those out at the same time?
I believe
Okay.
so, yeah. Yeah.
And I apologize for going
So
back
that
to this,
wasn't,
but
hold on,
you-
but give me, I just want to follow up on
Yeah,
that,
that's
because
on
the
that
one
too,
thing
but
we were
okay.
talking about, in which you sort of show the percentages on the one updated chart, where you've got some of the other stuff on the capacity side, but I thought we were, and it may be in here because we're just getting all this stuff, is the total capacity, and then, so not just how it changed to, over the years, but the total actual capacity, and then anything you reduce based off of
Yeah,
program.
so the
which
total
one is that?
capacity is the first page, and that's actually historical.
That's-
It's indicated by attachment 1.
Okay.
And so 2017 is our most recent.
So that's this one here. So
Yeah,
that-
it's
so in
this
that
one
case,
here.
The 443 went to 377, so that was the only,
Yes. Back to this page right here.
Okay.
Ms. Raza? Talbot
all
Springs,
right,
yes.
and then you go to which one after that?
So then the explanation is on the second page. And again, we're still going through it as to all of our changes. So for Talbot Springs,
Actually, it just says minus 66.
it says minus 66 would have occurred, that occurred with the facility change in 2014.
The facility, your
we
capacity,
recalculate-
that's.
yeah, our
Right,
capacity
but that had nothing
changed.
to do with another program then.
No, that had nothing to do
Okay,
with
you
the
said that
program.
a few minutes ago, you said it had to do
Yes.
with another program
There,
too.
that's what I'm saying, is the reason this is in draft is we're still looking
Oh,
at that
okay.
particular school, because there are other reasons out there as well. So we captured as much as we could, given yesterday's cutoff, so we're still
Okay.
going back.
That's fine.
But they do have a regional pre-K there, and we put the portables in place in 2016, I believe.
the one.
So that's where, even though I think, so there's another reason behind Talbot Springs is what
Well,
I'm
what does
getting at.
what does the portables do to the capacity of Talbot
So
Springs?
basically what happened was, in order to facilitate a regional pre-K at Talbot Springs, they moved, in this particular instance, they moved out the 4th and 5th graders from inside the building into the villas. They already had portables on site, but they added more. And so the pre-K went into the school, and it uses so many rooms. So those rooms that are used for the pre-K program are subtracted out of the capacity. Again, because this capacity here is important to note is K through 12. It does not include pre-K. And so, well, we could add another column that indicates where all of our regional pre-K, all our regional programs are. We do actually have that available. It's just in a different document, but I can add it certainly to this.
I think it was, and I'm not sure if we already had it, was the number of portables, and I guess villas, I guess that was a new one. Portables. Yes,
Are the
yeah,
villas the multiple units?
Yes.
With the
So-
bathroom?
So we have, yeah, they have the bathrooms. So those are our 5-spot, 9-spot modulars. An example, Duckett's Lane has a 9-room class portable. and that has its own facilities inside, and as well as 5 spot modulars, which are 5 classrooms, and they also have bathrooms. An example is at Swansfield Elementary School right now.
And I believe Howard High School has at least one of the villas,
They
if
have,
not more.
I think they have a 9 classroom. They have a total of 15 classrooms, and I want to say they have the 9 classroom over there. But I have all that information, and I can certainly provide you the latest and the greatest because we just placed more portables over the summer at 4 schools.
Okay, I think it would be good to have those.
There's an annual report on
Yes, there's an annual report.
Is that, can you send that, is that what you're talking about, or you?
Yeah, there's an annual report.
If you could send
The
that to
annual
us.
report plans for where placement is. Placement this year was to replace units at Centennial High School, to add a unit at Fulton. Again, we reclaimed community rooms at Fulton. And so we reclaimed the community room and added a portable there. We did Ellicott Mills. We added a portable, I believe a portable, maybe 2 portables at Ellicott Mills. So that report was done in March, I believe March 9th. So I can provide that all to you along with the regional programs and their locations. It's in that as well.
Well, I guess, I know you've got to get going to answer the
Sorry.
question. So maybe one of the things, if you could do, is just for each of the ones in red in 2016, give your sort of thoughts on how we got there and what could have changed, or been done so that it wouldn't have occurred.
You want to see what capacity changes may have happened to make it go into the red.
No, not just capacity changes, it could be anything.
He's referring to your chart. Yeah. I'm going to pop that up. Sorry.
So I think it's the one more.
Yeah, well, it's that one and then the one, or.
One next to it,
it's-
yeah. Right.
It's elementary, the 2016, actually the first one you had, but it also goes, which that you can do the one with the number of residential units built with the overlay is probably the better one.
So I think Mr.
Go.
Weinstein, I think it's like 2 or 3 more.
2 or 3 more?
Two,
They're past it.
One more. That's that one, I think, right? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, so, here we see that, so we have all these ones that became red with somewhere
This is
between
2016 actual, okay.
0 and 30 housing
sorry.
units with the exception
I'm sorry,
of.
one more is the 13, that's 16?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that one right there.
Oh, okay.
Well, I'm on 16 now,
Oh, okay.
actually.
Oh.
Okay, sorry.
116?
16, yeah, because now we're saying, you can look
Okay.
back at 13, that may
Right.
give some of the story, because
Exactly.
they may have already been in the red, already, or they may have been, somewhere else. So then the question becomes, as you're looking at that, and looks like, 2 of them with 0 units, a couple with, 2 or 3 units, then you have the 30 and the 79, and then the other with the 360 or 380, or whatever it is. What were the things? I mean, like, obviously, the housing units in that one is going to be, a lot of the cause, but I want you guys, so in that case, what would have been able to change it? I think that's the one that's tied to Turf Valley that was grandfathered in 1986, prior to any of us, being involved, or most of us not living in the county, except for, yeah, well, 3 of the 5 of us weren't even in the county at that point. But could still things been done around preparing for it? What could have been done and prepping for that, happening? So just want to, just don't want to do all,
You just want the
every
red
elementary
ones.
school, all of them, their stats, but I think those would be just good to say, how do we get there? And what could have potentially been done differently? And in some cases, it might not. We changed capacity, and then when we got where we're at, and we didn't do it redistricting, and, just to account for that, because there wasn't any other growth. Whatever the answer is, just, I think it would be good to get your guys, in conjunction, maybe that, with
Sure.
Mr. Brown, is to get that information to us. I think that would be helpful in strategizing any sort of plan.
Sure. I apologize, I do have to go now.
That's fine.
Okay.
So in terms of the follow-up on that one question regarding the high school test
Now,
and the
that would
relationship.
be.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We're good.
You're good, you're good.
Thank you very much.
papers.
Thank you very
Keep her
much,
in the
Ms.
papers.
Kamens. Appreciate your time today. No, not at all.
Okay, so I want to make sure that I understand the question so that I
Just move
answer.
the
them.
microphone.
Yeah.
Just move it closer. It's
This
fine.
better?
Yeah.
Okay. Your question was regarding the high school test and how it would be applied with other programs, was that?
Yeah, well, so I guess the thing is, one of the suggestions is that we add
A
high school test.
exactly.
So if we were to add it, okay, and I can understand based off of some of the things that have happened, why that could be warranted. But if we're also looking at already some things having to do with the things we heard this morning with programs, and other programs may be in play, and there's existing programs now, as Chairman Weinstein had mentioned earlier, like ROTC or whatever, is, how do you end up applying the high school tests when those are, when they currently and potentially will have a bunch of other programs where people could be going to them? How would you apply it? Or would it be something that really ends up being a policy thing for you guys on how you allow those programs to be used in managing the capacity? So looking for guidance and understanding as far as, from your guys' perspective,
Okay, I think the first
given
thing.
given those, really what we're seeing as facts at this point.
Okay, so I think the first thing to look at is that,
I don't know if there's something wrong with your mic, or I'm having trouble hearing you, and I'm getting people doing this in the back. Yeah,
is this any better?
You try moving it really close.
Is this better?
that's better.
Okay, that's.
Thanks.
okay. You're very welcome. Okay, so I'm going to break this down in order to answer it. The high school's test is a tool of indication. It's a tool that we have to be able to have us have an idea of where are we, should we do, how do we mitigate growth if we are over capacity, just like we do for the elementary school and the middle school. The programs are two things. They're programs, which is a policy decision of the school system. And number two, in this particular case, using the Jump Start program, it's being used as a mitigation device for overcrowding. So they're related in the sense that the high school test is used to continue to give us more information as knowing where we are when it comes to capacity in the high schools, because right now, we're not looking at high schools at all. There is no high school test. So we're having, and what's before us is funding for a new high school, because obviously we need more seats. So I see them as working together and I do not see, how do I explain this? I do not see programmatic mitigation as a rationale for not including a high school test.
And so I'm not saying that we don't, I'm saying, but how would you do it? So for example, you might have, like we talked about before, whether it's, different types of percentages for different things. So it might be, when you're looking overall at capacity, if we're getting to whatever, 95% of capacity of all of our high schools as a whole, regardless of mitigation factor, that hopefully there's some planning that's going on if there's projected growth. But if you were talking about, you also have recommendations in there for a single high school. Okay, so if you're at one of the high schools that has, ROTC, and that just happens to be a program that has been there, is that potentially, if it could be solved by moving that program into another high school, so it wouldn't impact the, sort of the home community as much, and it's still an option for wherever, wouldn't that be one of the solutions, that you would be looking at? I mean, how would you decide those things, if you put it 100% based off of the home attendance, because the home attendance wouldn't count.
Well, the
So that's why,
attendance would be-
so how would you do those numbers? What would be your rationale as you went through that? I mean, and I'm open, I just want to, I'm just, thinking through it, because it's not just the ones that are temporarily there to mitigate. There could be, just like we've historically had, there could end up being, a STEM program, a full STEM program, bringing in more equipment. I know what Ms. Vaillancourt said about having everything have all the same opportunities, but you can't always have the same equipment. That's just not practical. Or the same thing if you had an art, something that was focused, more on the arts or whatever as a magnet. You might have, a school that, has more, resources to support it. Just in how you would, how it's not always just about from a capacity standpoint. And so at that point, how would you look at those numbers.
Well, I think we would look at the numbers and feed them in as another data point, just like
But how would we do it as a test? You're asking us to do this in APFO, so.
The APFO is a separate, I don't want to say animal, but it's a separate animal. The APFO
But that's
test-
when we're being asked to.
Right, but you're looking at what are the numbers at the high school? Like if a high school is, let's say it's at 100, let's use 100 because I like the number and it's an easy number to use. If the high school is at 115%, there's a problem. There has to be some sort of mitigation. So by having the test, it puts that pause in for us to come up with mitigation, whether that mitigation is moving or adding a rot seat program, whether or not it is to do a jumpstart program, whether or not it is that we need to build an addition at that school or at a closer or at a different school, or we need a whole new school. Whatever the situation will lend itself to is the solution that we will come up with. Obviously, we would get community input, we would get there would be a whole process as to what to do. But again, what the test will allow us to have is that important time for a pause so that we can figure out how to get ourselves out of this problem. Because right now, we don't have that, and this is where we're sitting right now is with the high school. That's the example on the table.
May I? So Howard High School is at 136% approximately. We saw that, right? We'll say more or less. Do you know at any given time in the day what percentage of students are actually in the building? Because when I look at an elementary school, the elementary school kids, and you say it's at a certain capacity, the kids are in the building, as with the middle school kids. But when you get to high school, you have the ARL programs that go from the school to either a morning program at the ARL or an afternoon program at the ARL. We have mentorship programs that take students out of the school. We have students now involved in perhaps going to HCC, perhaps not. And so I think that's one of the, as Mr. Fox was talking about this, one of the things that jumped out at me was that it's easy to determine the capacity of an elementary or a middle school because you don't have students that are coming and going because of program. But at the high school level, we do have students that are coming and going as part of a program, and they are assigned to a high school. And so, and then it's at the elementary school and the middle school level, you have students that are there because it's their home school, and you may have a program that they go to, so they come there as the result of the special program that they're in. But at the high school level, especially in the schools that have the ROTC programs, those programs are self-selecting, and you can go to any one of those programs if you can get yourself there, which means that you are not counted in your home school for capacity. You are now counted in the school that you are involved with the ROTC program.
Hold on, so can you repeat that? So I want to
Utilization?
make sure I understood that. So you're saying that they aren't counted in the capacity when they do that?
They're counted in the capacity of the school that they're going to. They're not counted as...
Right, and they're going to, right, okay.
Yes, no, they are counted as capacity. No, absolutely. But they're there by choice. I mean, the ROTC program is the only program that I believe we currently have in the school system where you can choose to go there and you have to get yourself there, as opposed to the ARL programs, except for the mentorship programs. But all of the ARL programs, you go to school, you get on a bus, they take you to the ARL, and then return you, and another round of students go from your school. Yes. Right. So when you look at what's the real capacity, or what's the real utilization of the school, because capacity is what the capacity is.
Right.
The numbers of students registered are the numbers of students registered. But when it comes to trying to have a test, what are the actual numbers of students that are in the building given the breathing that happens around high school? And so, and I think that that's an important factor, in terms of trying to come up with some sort of a test in terms of being able to accomplish it.
No, I agree. I think that is another piece that we should have that and if you would allow me to go back to our planning folks, and I will ask not only for Howard, I'm going to ask this across the system, because, again, this is good information to help inform our decisions and figure that out. But I was just told that at any given time, there are 250 less students at Howard High School due to this fluctuation. Now, that being
I don't
said,
understand that.
That's significant.
But, yeah, I don't understand that number. What is that? Yeah, how can there be
Yeah, make sure your
250
microphone
students?
is on, Mr. Blum. There you go.
Coincidentally, we were having this discussion in Cabinet the other day, and so I can pass on the estimate. It all can be as an estimate, from Mr. Frank Eastham, who was asked that question. And for all the reasons that Ms. Siggety said, he said, I would say that at any given time, there are probably 250 students enrolled at Howard who aren't there, whether it's because of absenteeism, whether it's because of a program, et cetera. So that's his, based on experience.
Well,
Not a data point.
Right, and absenteeism
It's
wouldn't be
just
as relevant.
an estimate, quantifying the
yeah,
point that Ms. Siggety is making.
But it's not quantifying it if it doesn't come from, like, it's not measured.
Well, and I don't mean to
It's a-
represent that
Yeah, okay.
But
it's
they could.
empirical.
Oh, right, you're
but-
giving us just a general thing right now while they go potentially look at it just for discussion
Yeah.
purposes.
Right.
And I would just, and my only thing to that would be, I wouldn't want to include absenteeism in that, because that's not from a programmatic
Right.
standpoint, and isn't going to be a consistent thing versus somebody who's in the ARL class and, in the morning, and the different one that's there in the afternoon.
my
is a much
understanding of
different
ARL is-
situation.
You know, it's
Yeah.
interesting, though, that you could track absenteeism, right, on just on a weekly basis and have a certain percentage. Not that I'm arguing that you should or consider it, because then you'd consider it across all of your levels. No, I was really talking about program.
Programs, I know
Okay,
you were.
but
it's just
in
when you
terms
brought
of-
it up, I was just
yeah.
saying, I want to make sure it's only program. I don't think it should.
But can we just go back to ARL for a minute? Because my understanding, having visited ARL this year, the first day, back-to-school day, was that it's used for several hours in the morning. Then the students that would be there are returned to their high school for the rest of the day. So I'm not sure how we could take out that capacity. And it's not used as a full-time, not used in the same capacity in the afternoon.
No, some programs are the afternoon.
I think
There were
what's-
limited programs in the afternoon. I don't believe it's,
I think what I'm hearing from this conversation is that high school is a little more difficult to track, and that I heard from Board of Ed members that you would go back and take another look and maybe help us with some guidance on what that could look like, because the high school's test is new territory for us.
Yes.
I don't know that I would agree that it's harder to track. I think we just don't have the numbers in front of us. I don't think
Harder to
this,
track than elementary school?
yeah, I don't know that.
Okay.
I don't know that. We have regional programs in the elementary school.
just
I
the
don't think that's
fundamental-
it.
I
I'm
don't
not-
think, I don't think you're just saying track, Mr. Rasta. It's that there's a lot of, there's a fluctuating, there's a lot of moving parts in them.
But we don't know what that fluctuation is yet. So why don't we wait till we see the data? Because we don't know, I mean, how many kids are out for mentor program? I don't know.
I believe
mean,
that's
it's
what
pretty-
Dr. Ball just said, that we. that-
But
that
what I'm
we-
saying is I don't think it's that complicated. I
But
don't think we should conclude that it's complicated. I think we should
Nobody's
get the
saying
data.
that finding the number is complicated.
No.
We're saying that,
Test.
that during any given day, there are a number of factors that contribute to the number. We're just asking these folks to go back and get us that number. Because they apparently have had this conversation before, and they just don't have it with
Right.
them.
And it's
And I
not
think
just that-
interestingly enough, and those numbers will change from year to year.
Year to
based
year,
on-
and, yeah, sure.
Right, and could change from
Within
from
the-
month to
within-
month
yeah.
as well.
But going back to the original thing, I agree with you on those things as well. But, if you go back to, like, ROTC, so you're talking about like having the time, and if you go back, you see Howard, which has had the ROTC program in it for many years, already being well over capacity. And I brought up just only back to the 2012 report, and, and seeing what some of those numbers were all the way back then. It's not, here it is. I'm guessing if I went and grabbed all the way back to my very first one, we've already seen that, yet still nothing was done despite having capacity in other locations.
well, I
And I
think,
know you weren't there. I'm just, I'm not saying, I want to be clear, I'm not a deck, but I'm just saying, so the question then becomes, how much time? I mean, if it's being caused, certain things are being caused because they're being ignored, I mean, how do we end up putting in a test for all that? that's what we need your help on. I'd go back to Dr. Ball. I'm willing to not try to figure it out right now and hear back from you guys after you've had a chance to discuss it. But, look at all those factors and think through, how we give us some guidance on how it could make sense and to
Right.
do it, or what the process in doing it.
Because we don't know what that's going to look like.
Right.
Because, for example, I'm going to sort of go off what Mr. Rossa was saying, is if we say, for example, there are, I'll use an easy number, 100 students that at any given day are not within Howard High School, okay? So we're reducing by 100. However, that may not necessarily impact our need of physical
Agree.
classrooms. We still are going to need, let's say,
Agree.
200 classrooms, whether or not it's 900 students,
Agree.
1,000 students, or 1,200 students.
Agree.
So again, I think it's a very interesting data point that we should look at and try to figure out if it can help us inform.
Right.
I think, personally, I believe there's a lot of data we should just have anyway,
Right.
because I think it's helpful.
Right.
So
You know
I
me, I'd love to
appreciate,
have it.
Yeah, and just back to, like, for ROTC for a second, I don't know that is, I agree with you in terms of where it was placed to begin with. And I have no idea what the, I don't know that any of us know exactly why it was placed there to begin with. But once it's there, I don't think it's the easiest thing to move. I mean,
But you also, I'm not saying it's the easiest thing, but you still have there's a number of years to have had that discussion.
right,
and
but
stuff
there's a
like that,
cost to
it's-
that, there's funding that came from
Well, is that or
the
is that
military.
or-
I know there's some funding that went into classrooms,
I
et
don't
cetera.
dis-
So I don't
dis-
think that's a super, I don't want to make.
I don't disagree with you. And so I'm not saying it definitively, but, it's that or you're potentially redistricting, the community more than you might have to. That's all. I mean, it becomes a decision.
Yeah, it's just data. I mean, nobody's saying that they don't have the data on expected capacity. I mean, we have it going out 10 years on the chart. So it's what I was saying before, it's where the decisions that are made there in the school system side, and then when they come over to our side, and how we address it as well. So the data's there. It's a question of how do we most efficiently deal with it as early in the process as possible.
and I think it's important for us as a school system, when we provide this data to you, for example, I'll use Howard as an example, you need to have we need to have it very clear that there are 15 relocatable classrooms, what the capacity is, what the actual numbers are, so that we want you, as well as a board member, I want as fulfilled of a picture as possible of what we're making the decisions about, because that may help us when we say, okay, well, why can't we do what we're doing with Howard at Glenelg or somewhere else? It'll, again, and as you all well know, the other piece that complicates all of this is that it involves children, and we have very passionate parents, and I appreciate that, because I'm a parent as well. But, there is that piece of it, which is deciding as a community, what are our pressure points and what's
Right.
that sweet spot?
Yep, no, agree.
Very good. Okay, on this topic, any further? We had a little bit more.
Topic, you
cover-
mean this?
With our friends from the school system, who's now down to the intrepid Ms. Delmont Small. We have Mr. Lorenzo, who's going to walk through some of the data that he has some follow-up to our last work session. Ms. Delmont Small, thank you very much for all the time you spent.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank
No,
you.
no, and this is a twofer. We appreciate you taking that. Okay, colleagues, so as we discussed before our break, we'll go back over to Mr. Lorenzo, who provided us a fair amount of information yesterday, go through that, and then at this stage of the game, we're asking sort of questions based on topics as they're presented. And I know, Mr. Lorenzo, you brought back Mr. Edmondson for any roads conversation. I don't know if you want to answer that question first so he can return to
Sure.
his day.
Sure. Good afternoon. So, as Chairman Weinstein just mentioned, we updated a number of the analyses that we presented to you at our last work session, and then did some additional analyses that was requested that we've included, that Mr. Brownell and I will go through. There are actually two items that I noted in my email yesterday that are amendment items that both the Department of Planning and Zoning and that MBIA has requested, and I thought it would be appropriate to bring those to the table today. I can pull up the email on the screen if you want, or you have it in hard copy in front of you. But I'll first ask Mr. Edmondson to come up and explain these are both roads-related items, by the way. I'll first ask Mr. Edmondson to explain his item and allow for some discussion from the council on that. What Mr. Edmondson is about to discuss is not currently written in any way in the legislation. So this would be a new policy.
Amendment.
And a new amendment to the bill, correct?
Okay, I want to thank the council for hearing this and for consideration. Currently, a minor subdivision, which is 4 lots, is exempt from having to do an APFO roads test. What I'd like to do is kind of coordinate that with what's called a re-subdivision of the same number of lots, maximum of 4 lots. For a re-subdivision is a subdivision that's been through the process before. There was the ability to, at some time later, to create additional lots from that subdivision. So it gets a different name, it falls under different criteria, and it has to do an APFO roads study. What I'd like to do is just coordinate the minor subdivision requirement with the re-subdivision requirement such that the re-subdivision requirement does not have to do an APFO road study for a maximum of 4 lots. At this time, what we tend to see is an older subdivision come back and have a single lot being re-subdivided to create, for the most part, it's 1 additional lot, and they're having to go through a APFO road study for that 1 additional lot. And that's the most typical. They could have more. It could be 2, 3, 4. It could be more than 4. I'm not asking it to be extended beyond the same requirements as a minor subdivision. But, you know, a single lot generates 1 trip during the peak hours that we are studying those trips, which is a lot of time and effort on the development process. Seeing that most of the time the re-subdivisions are being done by someone that's owned that lot for quite a bit of extensive time, coming in and making this request.
Is that, when you say, that's a term I'm not familiar with, re-subdivision, is that the same thing as infill, or is that somehow different?
It could be in an infill zone, where it's like an R20 zone that they are re-subdividing a lot. So it could be there. It could be out in the west. Out in the west, there currently is a 1-lot exemption if it's in the outside the planned service area in the RR district. So they are exempt for a single lot out there. We just don't get too many of them out in the west.
The request is to not do the roads test for infill.
For it could be for infill. It doesn't have to be in the infill. It may not qualify for that. But yes, it could also be in the infill.
For re-subdivision of 4 lots.
A maximum of 4.
Maximum.
Now, so you're saying that the first time through, they don't have to do one if it's 4 or fewer, but the second time through, they would?
Correct. So the first time land goes through a division process and it's 4 lots or less, it's considered a minor subdivision. That is currently exempt from the APFO requirements.
But if it's a minor subdivision of something that had already had a major subdivision, then it has to go through a
Correct.
test. Okay.
Yes.
For all intents and purposes, this is just a clarification to make some consistency between what are basically the same
Exactly.
same situation.
Yeah.
Consistency, but not clarification. It's a change.
It's a consistency, right, it's a change.
It is a
right.
change
I used the wrong
to
word. It's a.
remove the
it's
test for
make it
infill.
more consistent with, right, okay. And is the administration intending to submit this as a?
Not presently, no. We wanted to have a discussion today.
Okay.
Administration's considering it.
We're considering it.
Okay.
Well, thank you for the information on that and the heads up, yep. Good. Any questions on that particular point? Okay. And then the second?
Sure. One more housekeeping item on roads is an amendment that was requested of the administration by MBIA as it relates to a provision that is in this APFO bill, CB61. One of the task force's recommendations were to require that a planned traffic remediation project that the developer is responsible for building must be in construction before being able to be used as a remediation of a failed traffic test. And so, in other words, When a developer takes the roads test and it is that developer is deemed to have to remediate a road that they're responsible for, so not a state road, they have to build that remediation. There was concern.
Or get it started.
They have to complete it.
Okay.
And so there was, the task force raised concerns that those remediation projects were not done in accordance with the development itself. So there may be instances where the development could be completed and the road remediation project hasn't started yet. So the task force was interested in aligning those efforts, meaning the development happens concurrently with the remediation project. And so the administration crafted language where that would be incorporated into the developer agreement that's done through the Department of Public Works, and that is in CB61 right now. The home builders requested an amendment to our language. So I'll ask, I know the home builders are here, I'll ask Mr. Greenfield to come up and explain his amendment. I can first read to you the language that we have in CB61 for context, so you know what the change is that is being proposed. So CB61 currently reads, procedures under the subdivision and land development regulations provision for developer agreements. The agreement shall provide when the off-site road improvements are required to be started in the sequence of construction. The sequence of construction is set forth in the approved plans and specifications shall be incorporated into the agreement by reference. Failure to construct road improvements in accordance with the developer agreement and incorporated approved plans and specifications may result in default in accordance with the agreement, and building permits shall not be issued. So in summary, what that is saying is that's requiring that the developer agreement specify the time at which that remediation project must occur to keep.
Instead of doing it up front as was proposed. Instead have a developer agreement, or what's changed? What's the change?
The only thing that's changed is specifying the time at which the remediation project must be completed. So right now, there's no time specifying when that road remediation project must be done. In other words, it could occur after the development is done. And so this will put into the developer agreement a timeline at which the developer must complete the remediation.
The proposed bill, don't you already know when that will be? Because it'll be before it's approved. So what's changing?
We're not trying to change what's in the proposed bill in terms of the process. As Carl said, there were concerns on the task force that remediation projects were not completed. Sorry. There was concern on the task force that remediation projects were not completed timely with the development. I'm not aware of any examples, but nonetheless, we're committed to completing those timely with the development. So we support that amendment. The change that we're asking for is just one word. I don't have the bill in front of me, but it's on-site, right? So on page 4, line 17, and then there's another instance, I believe, on the next page. It says off-site improvements. We're just asking for it to be changed to on-site improvements, which is what we can control, something that's on-site of the project. We can control when those improvements occur. If it's off-site, let's say it's an SHA project or something like that, we can't control that, so it wouldn't be fair to require that to be completed before we could move forward in the developer agreement. And this is what the task force agreed on. It was, I guess it was an error in drafting.
The task force agreed to do only on-site?
Yes.
So, what's the administration's thoughts on this?
We, like the other one, we're just considering it, right? We have not.
I guess it's odd to me that if the task force made the recommendation, the administration drafted the legislation, then they filed it, then the council's dealing with it. MBIA had some concerns, and the council got about 100 emails from MBIA.
Good.
But then when you actually have a recommendation for an amendment, you go to the administration then brings it to us, and they don't have any thoughts about it. You don't think that timing is...
I can't speak for the administration, Mr. Ball.
Well, why did you come to us? Why it wasn't in some of those emails about we love it the way it is?
Mr. Ball, it was in my initial testimony in July. It was in there. You can go back.
It's just odd to me.
I can't. I thought the administration was supportive of this amendment, so this is news to me. If it isn't, I guess we'd like to understand why.
If this is a correction.
My understanding it was a correction. This is what the
then-
task force agreed to.
So,
Mr. DiLorenzo, is that a correction from the administration
checking.
standpoint?
I'm checking the language right now.
Yeah, Mr. Browner, you were there.
Yeah, if I was on the task force, and this might, Mr. Rosa, your question about on-site versus off-site, I think the intent is, let's say the road, it really has to do with the developer's responsibility versus the state's responsibility. The task force did discuss that, so the developer needs to finish the projects that they're responsible for before the project is finished. That's what the current legislation proposes to do. And so they would be responsible for all the on-site roads, plus any off-site roads, right, that the developer would be responsible for. Let's say it's an adjacent arterial, for example, that they might need to widen. They are responsible for that. That's in the developer's agreement. They have to pay for and construct that. That would all apply through this timing issue, where we were going to basically tie building permits to the improvement. That's what the current legislation proposes to do, to basically say, you need to finish this road improvement by X percent of the development done. Currently, it's not tied to building permits, so we're not going to tie it to building permits through the developer's agreement process. I think what this clarification is intended to do, and what the task force discussed, was if there's another road project that has to be improved that the developer isn't responsible for, like a state highway administration project that maybe they paid a fee in lieu for, but they have no control over when the state is going to build that road, then it was thought during the task force discussion that you can't hold the developer responsible for that. You can't hold the project up if the state is in charge of finishing that project.
That's exactly right. And we're not in any way trying to get out of any obligations that we have per the developer's agreement, merely saying that there are certain things within our control and certain things that are outside of our control. For example, if you pay into the fund for an SHA project that, you know, we don't know how long that will take, others may be also paying into the fund or some other instance. You know, we're asking that you don't hold up the building permits, even though we fulfilled our obligations.
So does the language proposed, is that narrowly tailored enough to I don't know if the administration's looked at it, if Office of Law, or does it just, so you're saying it's supposed to be very narrowly tailored to those roads which you're not constructing, but you've had to pay into?
Correct. I mean, the change is just one word. It's off-site versus on-site.
Well, I mean, one word could
No, I
change an entire
understand. So,
piece of
so
legislation,
off-site would apply, actually technically off-site would not apply to the things that we are, that we have under our control, which are things on the project site, right? There would actually only be other stuff, which is outside our control, which is kind of an interesting issue.
But what about the things that are off-site that you have to do? Like if you have to do a
those are
road
within the-
to straighten a
sure.
road or do something else on the,
Those are going to be embodied within the developer's agreement, like Mr. Burnout said.
okay, but in terms of the law, I understand that you're saying that would be in a developer's agreement. But what's the law that you're asking us to change going to say?
Right now, the law doesn't exist. It's proposed in the APFO ordinance.
Okay.
And, you know, what the APFO ordinance as proposed says is that we cannot move forward unless the things that we're required to do are completed. Currently, it says off-site, which I believe to be a mistake.
Well, and on that specific point, I know you have a question, but on this point, because I think you might have also uncovered, to what you just said, Mr. Ross, that one word could change. You just said, right now it says off-site, so the way it's written now, does that mean that if you haven't completed the on-site, then you can continue? And that might be that we need the Office of Law to make sure that as it's written now, that it doesn't actually not only do the exact opposite, stops you from moving forward because of something going on off-site, but then releases you from your obligations to do something on-site. So
This is the first time I've actually comprehended that, to be totally honest. So
no,
I think it's a great question.
Well, and so, but just go back to the point is, I'm sort of stuck on what Dr. Ball said a moment ago, and that is, this is an amendment to the administration's bill proposed by somebody outside. I know when it's ours, we either deem those friendly or not. So it would be really helpful for you to tell us if you deem this friendly, and if you don't, then you're sort of asking us to fix a problem with the legislation, and then we have to take it under advisement
certainly.
as well. So, and I don't know, Mr. Cope, you don't need to answer that question right now unless you have an answer right now, but,
Haven't seen anything, so it's
okay,
hard to
that's fine.
answer.
So we can deal with that potential double unintended consequence on it, but I just wanted to bring that up before I forgot.
Yeah, and I'm
Mr.
not
Mr.
sure, I
Fox.
think I may need Mr. Evanson on this, but I understand generally, what you're requesting, but I guess, is there certain situations that we know up front? It's not because they haven't, the state or whoever hasn't gotten their part done, but we know going in it's going to take a while, and I guess why should, the citizens then be put in that, in the predicament of that not being done, not because of the state not acting, but because there was known things going into the development that it was going to take X amount of time, or that type of situation. So sort of slightly variation on the situation. I mean, I can understand if you go in with an expectation, you provide X development money, this thing's supposed to be done the end of the calendar year, and it's not. That's a different story. I get that, and I can see reasons to be, to be supportive of that, because you've made, investments and there's some predictability issues involved. But if you know going in that there's some things that are still going to, that as part of the whole plan, something's happening, whatever, 2 years after, I'm not sure that you should be released of that, depending upon the specific situation, if that makes sense.
I would ask maybe Chad to comment on the way that state projects typically work.
Couple clarifications. Most
Okay.
APFO improvements for roads are not adjacent or contiguous to the site. They tend to be away from the site.
Right.
Within that 1.5 or 2 mile radius. There are different circumstances. It could be a county-controlled road that the developer is working strictly with DPW and DPZ. It could also be a road that is part county, part state. It could be funded completely by the developer. It may also have funding from the state that they're dependent on having that funding in place. So I think there's a lot of situations, as far as funding and how much of that development the developer is going to do as opposed to the state. I think at least those 3 different situations have to be, and there could be some more situations I haven't even thought of at this moment. But the on-site versus off-site, the vast majority of those improvements would be off-site, not contiguous with the site.
I understand, but if there were off-site improvements that were required to make particular intersections or, or test, I mean, I guess if there was still this time frame that was known ahead of time, I guess I'm just trying to understand what the logic side, I'm open, I'm just trying to understand at that point why, that release should come.
No,
as
I
well.
agree with you. I think the challenge, as I interpret what, thank you, that was very helpful, what you just said. Then the issue isn't onsite, offsite, it's what's within the control of the developers. And then it goes to a legal question, is can the county hold up a development based on the fact that either the state, I can think of a couple of examples right now where the developer is willing to pay for the improvement, but the state isn't willing to execute the project, right, for other reasons, for numerous reasons. So can we, I'm sort of leaning over to you, can the county hold up a development for that reason? And is that your concern, that you're being held to, the development might be held up absent something within your control?
That's exactly correct. I mean,
So
that
it's
would
not
be
an offsite,
that would
onsite.
be-
If you're required to do something offsite, as Mr. Edmondson just explained, that many of these projects are offsite, that, you should not be relieved of it because of its location. You're concerned about being required to do it based on your ability to affect its completion.
So you said something additional, though, too, which was
We're
them not
pulled
even
on a thread,
agreeing.
now the whole sweater's coming apart.
Yeah, exactly. And that was the, what you had said was, also was that they may have not even agreed to do it, which is even another issue. So there's sort of like 3 different things, and at least maybe growing, but there's them not agreeing to do something, or, not
The
agreeing.
state might not approve
of
something
doing-
that is a mitigation.
Right, that we were requiring, and, then that means the mitigation isn't occurring, and then is it similar to, other things that maybe it will occur or whatever over time, and it should be, maybe potentially held up for X amount of time. I'm not I'm just asking,
So-
as a discussion, let me just finish. And it's on the second one being, they did make an agreement, and they just haven't gotten around to doing it. For whatever reason, they're delayed. They had committed a certain time. That one I'm a little bit more sympathetic towards. And then there's the one where it's not going to happen for X amount of time, and, at what point should we be releasing it, based off of that? Is it based off the time that was agreed upon, and when they were there, or just because you finished your part, should it be released? And that one I'm struggling with, a little bit as well. So, I mean, my colleagues may have some other thoughts or questions around it. I'm not necessarily, I know you may have to talk to other folks or whatever, but, those are some of my, I guess, would be my concerns.
I guess my perspective is, if you went to the administration and it was your understanding that it was just an error because the administration didn't put it in the way that the task force had it, I'd like you all to work with the administration and the administration to let us know what you're thinking, what the ramifications are of this potential amendment.
See, I guess I would quasi disagree, because whether it was a mistake or not a mistake, the concept of those other issues are also in front of us, and that wasn't necessarily something that anybody else was talking about, and I want to make sure,
Well, we can
that
weigh it
part
as
of
a
it.
policy matter,
They
but if we're
can,
going to
but, I mean,
approve it
but we
because it was
start-
just a mistake, that's
Right.
a different story. So
Well, that's why my
we want
last
to
point
know.
about the ramifications, I think the administration, as Mr. Edmondson and Mr. Di Lorenzo indicated, could look at this and let us know, what does this really mean? What would the changes, even if we think conceptually that it's something that should be considered, practically, how will it impact things?
Right, but I mean, you're talking about the task force, and that being sort of the deciding thing, that it should have just been.
Not at all.
Oh, I thought you did. You
I
said-
was talking
you
about
did-
that as
you
far
did
as
say
the
that.
process.
And to
I know, but
The process that they indicated was that the task force made this recommendation,
Right.
that there was an error, that they went to the administration, and what I asked was that the administration look at the ramifications of what this kind of change would make, and then come back to us and let us know about those implications.
Certainly.
Yeah,
And
no,
to
no.
clarify, the task force did not differentiate between off-site and on-site, which is why
Okay.
I wanted to bring it forward as a proposal made,
Well,
as a
and
request made.
I think you've just heard the conversation that may not even be the correct correction. So, and to Dr. Ball's point as well, I think, and what Mr. Fox, I think, is saying is, we're considering other potential amendments, and the information that we're exchanging right now is relevant to those items. And so, to parse this specific issue, make sure that it's addressed. And then, I mean, since we're on this topic, I don't know if there's any other information colleagues need relative to roads. I know we're doing a little bit of wild card here in terms of topics, and Mr. Lorenzo is going to go through his presentation, but is there anything else related to roads? Mr. Greenfield, you may have some input on that as well, but anything else, colleagues, on this particular topic?
You said something about this being part of the developers agreement, but can we require you to do something in the developers agreement that's not in the law?
Yes. Well, I mean, it is part of the law. There's a lot of parts of the development process that are outside of APFO. So I've never executed a developer's agreement. I would say maybe Chad would be better to talk about that, but certainly you can bind us to things with the developer's agreement that are not embodied in APFO.
But can we make road requirements? I mean, could you make them do a road before the development?
So keep
If
in
it's
mind
not in the
how
law.
the process works for roads, just roads specifically. The APFO study is submitted with the sketch plan, the very first plan. At that time, it either passes or fails. If it fails, at the preliminary plan, a mitigation plan is submitted. Mitigation plan is reviewed to find out whether it's adequate to fix the issue or not. Once that's approved, then we move on to the final or the construction drawings. So we're at, several steps to see this and see the progression. At final, once the finals are approved, we know it all works. They've been through both the county, DPZ, DPW. If it's SHA related, they've been through the state, has seen it as well, and they know whether they need an access permit or what construction documents are needed from them. With the approval of the final plan, now the developer's agreement is done. That mitigation plan is incorporated as part of the developer's agreement. So it becomes a construction document, will be the exhibit in the
developer's agreement.
But that's if they agree to it, not if, no, you can't come up with that as a requirement if it's not in the law.
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
Good question. Thank you. Any other questions while we have Mr. Evanson here? And
Could we move forward without a developer's agreement? And just say, no, we're not going to do that, but we're going to move forward anyway?
I would say probably not, because the improvements being public would not be inspected by by DPW.
Right. Okay.
Develop agreement, it's about what it says. Those are two different things.
Okay.
Okay.
Any, all right, so any last call for questions on this, on roads, since we have gone down this road? Okay. Just trying to lighten it up, folks. We've been at this for dozens of hours now.
So we're done with,
Ms. Feldmark, is that applause or? No, let's it's like, keep it moving.
I think she was praying for no more.
Please, no more jokes. Okay, very good.
Well,
Yeah, I think yes, thank you, gentlemen. Again,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Edmondson, for sticking in with us, appreciate it. So, Mr. DiLorenzo, we'll come back to you. And,
Yes. Thank you for letting us bring those two items forward to you. To turn to the additional analysis we provided yesterday, a presentation that Mr. Brano gave at the last work session. There were a number of revisions requested of that presentation, which has been completed and is on the screen before you. I'll let Mr. Brano walk through it. I'll move the slides for him.
Do I want to walk through it? Walk through it? Okay.
There you go.
All right. Sure, okay. So these are requests at the last work session based on the previous presentation, just additional information. And so the question came up, I had produced those charts that Mr. Fox showed just previously with the colored charts. His question, I believe, was, can you show those charts by regional capacities and countywide? So the next several charts, they're not in chart form but table form, so they're the same exact things that were in those charts for 2016 enrollment and 2016 capacity, but it now also includes the regional totals at the bottom. So you can see it kind of averages out. 98% is the countywide capacity.
so the only thing that's changed there is adding the regional?
That's the only thing that changed. All the
Okay.
numbers are the same. Yep. And this is middle.
And what
yeah,
jumps out
right.
there, whoops, go
Wait,
back.
go back.
So that's what jumps out there again is the top two on each, top one on each side, a little bit jump out.
The 106 and the,
Yeah.
right. The regions, the northern region
Right.
is 109.8 and the
Right.
Columbia East is 106.
Right, or especially the northern where every one of them is over 100 and then you're all the way at 109.
Yeah. And same thing for middle schools. And it's interesting to see that the countywide totals for all three school systems, elementary, middle, and high schools, countywide, it's under 100%, which means we currently have capacity countywide. Of course.
It's not always in the right places.
Exactly, right. That's middle schools, and then high schools, same thing, just shows the regions. And then this, this was, actually, we already talked about this when Ms. Kamen was here. So this is, I believe Mr. Fox had requested the same charts, but with 2013 numbers. And so that's what
Right.
this represents. We'll get
Yeah,
back.
so that's where we
to
can
the
sort of
regions,
see
right.
in looking
Yeah.
back where they were.
Uh-huh.
And then, so there were some that were red.
Right. And this chart compares the 2013 to 2016, and so it's interesting, given what Ms. Kamen presented, I had seen that before, this is the thing that we just discussed, and it shows in 2013, or 2014, that's when they did that major facility study. So that's, in large part, I think, because I haven't looked at this in detail yet, but I think in large part, that's the reason why you see these differences, because in 2014, they redid their capacity calculations for all the schools. So the capacity utilization is going to change. And so, for example, I think Talbot's Woods came up. You can see that's when they had the change from 433 to 377. So that's why it's higher. In Running Brook, the opposite. Running Brook, the capacity is, 405, and then it went up to 515 for whatever reason. I don't know what the reason is. Okay, so that's why you have these changes in capacities between 2013 and 2016. And this, yeah, this is with the development, with the building for 2013. The same building years, 2013 through September 16, but it's tied to the 2013 capacity numbers.
Ms. Feldmark, let me just for a second, are these available online if people want to be following along, or?
Check.
Thanks.
And then this request was, I had presented a chart showing, or a table showing capital spending on renovations versus new construction, and it was in percent terms. So this new chart shows it in actual dollar figures. And that's the next. What's that? Yeah, so the total amount was 1.6 billion. Of course, this is over 20 years or something like that. And then, yeah, this question had to do with what the average household size was. This was tied to fees. And so we got this information from the Department of Inspections, Licenses, and Permits, average unit size based on all units built between 2014 and September 2017, so about 3.5 years worth of data. And you can see we broke it out between east and west. So in the east, on the left, that's the average square feet per residential unit. So for example, on the east, single-family detached homes, average size is 4,774. And that's classified from DILP, which is the Department of Inspections, Licenses, and Permits, classified from DILP as all occupiable space, which includes basements and also garages. So that's why these numbers are relatively big, bigger than you would think, but it includes the total square footage of the home, even unfinished basements and garages. And in the west, the figure is very big, 7,000 square feet, but some of the homes in the west, if you look at the data in detail, there's some homes that are over 20,000 square feet, 15,000 square feet, very, very large homes.
Yeah, are you going to come back to that, or can we talk about how those are measured? 'Cause
So you want to know how they're measured?
yeah, yes.
Well, from what I understand, and I don't know the full details, but it's classified as occupiable space. It's the number that came from their database that they tie the school surcharge number to and the excise tax to. So the number in the database that these came from are the exact numbers that they figure out how much school surcharge and how much road excise tax the developer must pay or the builder must pay.
Well, you said occupiable space just now, but a moment ago you said includes garage.
So they classify garages as occupiable,
Occupiable
right?
space.
So I think what would be unoccupiable would be in an apartment building. That might include a corridor,
Okay.
something like that.
Gotcha, okay.
Yeah.
So is there anything else other than, so there's basement, garage? Is there anything else that's added?
I don't think so.
Because I
just
thought the
think,
numbers
yeah,
were,
Yeah,
I would say, very high.
right.
A quick add, Ms. Harrod from our office mentioned to me this morning that she actually went on to ESTAT and took a quick sample, and they do actually, the sample that she took actually agreed to these numbers.
Well, it's interesting because the sample,
Yeah.
I have a bunch here that I could go through, but none of them match. So I was wondering if it's because we don't have the dimensions of the garage in there.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Because SDAT doesn't have
Right.
that. So some of them were, I mean, as much as 750 square feet off, so,
Well, these are
Yeah,
averages. Are you looking at particular homes?
yes. I
Oh,
looked at,
okay.
I looked up
Yeah.
the particular homes with the data that backs us up,
Right, that's
Oh, I see.
and none of them matched.
the data that you provided. I forwarded it to Ms. Terrasi.
Okay, the detailed data.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
all right.
And Ms. Harrod had taken a sample and
Looked at
showed
that
that they
as
were approximately the same,
Okay.
correct?
They don't match the numbers that were used in the backup data that was used to calculate these numbers. But you say Ms. Harrod's numbers did they match, but you were adding on for garage? Because none of the ones that I looked at matched. And I probably pulled about 15 of them yesterday.
You know how to have a good time.
So when I was looking at some of the
Well,
data.
the numbers just seem so high to me, and maybe I just live in the tiniest house in the
No,
world, but.
I agree.
No, there were, so
Surprised
some of the
me.
houses that were on his list specifically were not listed in STAT because they have not been sold yet.
Or
So-
built, yeah.
Or built. So I was looking at comparable. So if there was a house, I'm not familiar with the roads, like, I don't know, whatever street, J Street, I would look at the houses that were numerically around that area. And the numbers that were on the detail were close. They were reasonable
Right.
numbers to me.
I pulled actual ones, like Fairmont Lane, for example. I went through Fairmont Lane, and none of the numbers were, so like one of them here was for 4349 on the chart. But if you add the basement and the rest of the square footage, it came to 3599. So that's a difference of 750. So I was wondering if that was, like, if somebody could tell us where the other square footage comes, it's the garage, how would you find that?
So I think to get to the answer, we'd probably have to talk to the Department of Inspections and Licenses and Permits to see how they actually calculate it based on architectural drawings. It could be that the way they look at it, that they base the fees on, is different than the way STAT assesses the house. There could be, so that's probably the reason there's differences. But from what I understand, getting this from DILP, these numbers are what the excise tax and the school surcharge are based on. The way they calculate it, and when they issue a building permit, they put that number in their database, and then the fee comes from those numbers.
You know, I mean, and I
Yeah.
understand that that's the number used. I'm just trying to
Yeah.
figure out, I mean, can we
Yeah.
get somebody from License and Permits, or how would we know how
As
the
far as the
number?
numbers what you were looking at, they were
I pulled
higher or
STAT
lower?
for each.
Yeah, no, I mean, higher or lower than the
The
average?
numbers on the chart that were used to make this were higher.
Okay.
In almost every, I think actually all the cases I looked up, than the numbers that if you add up the square footage for the living area and the finished basement.
Mr. Cook, do you want to add something?
I think Mr. Brownow's suggestion makes good sense because you're talking about three different denominators, all right? So the
Mhm.
state assesses certain
Can you lift your mic?
property-
Thanks.
The state assesses certain things for real property taxes, which may not sync
Right.
with the surcharge. The surcharge is based on occupiable area, which state law defines as, I just had it, designed for human occupancy in which individuals may work, live, or congregate for amusement, and equipped with means of egress, light, and ventilation. That's going to vary from home to home. But that's different from how SDAT may assess square footage because it's an improvement and you tax that. So I think getting somebody in here from DILP to talk about how they do the charge would be helpful.
Can we get somebody? You're in the same direction as Mr.
Cook, can we please
Di
get somebody from DILP?
I think Mr. Di
She wasn't
Lorenzo is
asking
in the
you.
same line. I'm asking him.
Oh, she was
Somebody
asking,
from
me-
DILP.
yeah. Mr. Cook
I mean, it
does
seems
wield
like
a fair
they're-
amount of power, but not that kind of power, so.
Yeah, I
if-
mean, can we get somebody here today? Like, if this is a discussion we're having, it just seems,
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
I think Ms. Feldmark's going to walk the 100 feet down the
the other
hallway
thing
and
I
see
learned
if,
was there's a lot of really big houses being built.
So, yeah, so if we can continue the conversation, and we can come back to this particular point, but I think to your point, thank you, Mr. Cook, for sharing that would
And I would
explain
al-
the difference. But-
I would also throw out a question. How would the numbers be different if we used median instead of average? Would the numbers go down?
We could take a look at that.
I'm just
I
curious.
don't know,
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm just
Right.
curious.
And before we move off this chart,
There's some,
Outliers.
sure.
Yeah.
Just
Uh,
curious.
Right.
So there's information on this chart which I wanted to ask. I think, Mr. Glendenning, you might actually have the answer to these, and that is in terms of the fees per square feet on the public school facilities charge and the road excise tax. Those are, is there any capacity? We're on the same chart. There's just numbers on here. I was just going to ask it. In terms of capacity for adjusting either of those numbers, does the council have authority to, is there capacity, and does the council have authority to, oh, you do? Oh, well, I was going to give Mr. Glendenning, he sat there nice and quietly all day. Okay, Miss,
I was going to say, I did pose this I did pose this question to Mr. Cook. Maybe he can answer that question.
Well, this is like ping pong. If Ms. Siggety's willing to give an answer, we'll ask
As soon
Ms.
as
Siggety, and
somebody
then you
asks
can-
a question, we can try and
So,
answer.
Mr.
Right.
Weinstein, I've asked this question at budget time before, which is why I know the answer, okay? So, school surcharge, as established in the first year, X amount per square foot, and has an automatic escalator in it, so,
It's an inflation escalator, is it?
yes, but but it automatically goes up. The road excise tax established a baseline, and that one is actually under the control of the council to a certain amount. And there's capacity in there. We have not kept up charging that to its max.
So, okay.
And Mr. Vinoy sent me a whole email on it.
Prior
Wouldn't
to
have-
his-
Prior to his departure, which I
This
will
weekend
track
for
down.
fun?
Yeah, no.
I was like, that.
No, but it
also a man who knows how to
established
get that
the baseline that we started at and where we had capacity, and we still have capacity in that to
Yeah, so
increase it.
I'd be interested to know, I don't know if Mr. Glendenning, you know what that capacity is off the top of your head?
It's based on was it Baltimore Builders?
Right.
Right.
Something?
At the time, which was not this budget, but last budget was something like 8 or 9 cents additionally we could have added.
Right, I think we talked, it was around $2 million, I'm guessing.
Yes, it was
so-
about 2
Okay,
million.
and so, but then, and so we can't raise it any more than that gap in the Baltimore figure.
I believe so, yes.
Without
State-
getting state
Correct.
enabling legislation. So, and then so.
And we
if-
can't
We can't change the schools number without
Without-
state enabling legislation. Because it's
Correct.
only adjustable annually per inflation, not, we can't go any
We
further.
can't just pick what we want. Nope.
Okay. Okay.
We can ask them to pick what we want.
Right, okay.
Right. And they would enable us to
Is
then.
there any constraints in setting a maximum up to, or we would have to do something similar? I'm looking at you, just in terms of setting a figure, they're asking our state colleagues to do that. Can we say, make it $80 a square foot and we'll get there eventually, or we have to have them pick it? I don't know, I just see you there, I wanted to try and get a reaction, but, or is it like was done before, we pick a number that we want it set at and then increase or?
That's a policy choice.
Okay, so it's not, there's no particular constraint on how we set the number, whether we set it high and move up to it, or give us capacity or not?
Subject to any constitutional limitations, you can tax something as much as you want.
Okay.
Now, what can be done in this legislation?
Enough there, Mr. Kirk.
So, yeah, so the question is what can be done in this legislation? So we, if I understand, we could increase in this legislation before us the roads figure, but that's not set in AFO, it just says that.
Right, that's what I'm asking. As far as APFO, what can we do?
As far as APFO, you cannot adjust the public school facility surcharge.
We can't.
And it's not part of, and the roads excise tax is not part of APFO.
Right.
Actually, you set that really when you do the
The
budget.
budget, right.
Yeah.
Is there any constraint on changing that at any time, or just traditionally done during the budget because it's part of that process?
It's part of the county's revenue estimates, so
Right.
that everything balances when
Right, okay.
fiscal year goes into effect.
Okay.
Because I know there have been a lot of constituents
Yeah.
who have wanted us to really look at that in this conversation. So I just wanted, I know many people have tuned in for many, many hours of these work sessions, and I just wanted it to be clear about the parameters.
Sure, what we're working with.
Exactly.
Right, and also just to remind everyone, as it relates to the roads excise tax, that we don't have to raise it on residential and commercial the same way. There's the option to
Yeah.
have.
Okay.
So again, just.
No,
for-
that's a
That's a very good
That's a
clarification.
good point. Yeah, and I believe other jurisdictions do set differently for different types of construction. Okay. All right, so while that information was on that page, I figured we'd add that.
Mr. Weinstein, I tried to
Yes, ma'am.
find it, but my computer will not allow me to search my archive.
Have you
And-
tried checking your cookies?
There you go.
I just forwarded one that was sent to all of the council back, June of 16, and it was from Jim with an update.
Oh, this is the one, right. Excellent. I actually remember that one, right?
It's great.
Okay.
Look at you earning your money, Mr. Glenn.
Well, he
His
couldn't,
computer
he
will-
said he didn't let him
his
answer the
computer
question.
will
so-
let him,
Well, every time I searched for Jim Vanoy, I got happy hour for some reason as a subject. But I'm getting rid of that cookie.
Very good. Okay, sorry, Mr. DiLorenzo. And as I pointed out to you silently on the side, as we are aiming for 3:30 conclusion.
So we have someone from Dilp here who can
Hey, great.
elaborate on square
Thank you.
square feet.
Thank you very much. If you wouldn't mind sharing your name for the audience, and
Yes, my name is George Martin.
thank you, Mr. Martin. And so, Mr. Rossi, you want to?
This was one, I wanted to find out how this was calculated, because it doesn't match SStat, so I'm guessing there's different things that are looked at.
Absolutely. We use basements and garages as part of the square foot calculation. So therefore, it does change, first, what assessed from tax records do, altogether.
It's the garage that's the difference.
It's the gross square foot.
And
of
where do you
everything.
get the garage? That is record that you have, or how do you get that?
It's part of our record, yeah.
Okay. So there's that question. There's some big garages, though.
Well, and basements too, the
unfinished
full
basement.
basement, which wouldn't be, under unfinished basements aren't assessed.
Okay, so full
that's a big
basement.
number.
I gotcha.
That's a big number, as much as a third.
All right.
You're earning your money today, too,
Yep,
sir.
that's helpful. Thank you.
Well, great. Thank you for asking the question, Mr. Rossi, and thank you, Mr. Martin, for coming out and coming down the hall and giving us a quick answer. Appreciate it. Anything else before Mr. Martin escapes?
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate you stopping
We
in.
have 2 additional slides for you in this presentation, both related to square feet and its correlation to impact and excise taxes.
Yeah, we worked jointly with the county auditors on this. They took the number in the previous chart, and that's Howard County's number, and then they did some research on the fee structures for other counties that you see there. And I think also provided in your packet was more detailed reference material where this came from. It's not on this chart necessarily, but this ranks by single-family detached, townhouse, and rento condo, the total impact excise tax comparison. So it includes all impact fees and excise taxes for roads, schools, and other things by county. And you can see Howard County in the east, Howard County is ranked about halfway. It's Montgomery County, as discussed previously, has the highest impact fees at $40,000. All the Queen Anne's, Prince George's, et cetera, and townhouse is about the same. And then the rental condo, based on square footage, that's where Howard County falls as well. And I think the next chart shows west. So this is a comparison of western Howard County. And I believe it also adjusts the other counties as well, based on square footage. Is that correct? Is that slightly? So if there was something data available, then it would just adjust that. So in Howard, so the ranking is a little bit less. Howard County is higher up in the ranking compared to the counties compared to the east, primarily because of the size of the units.
On the single family.
On the single family detached, correct. There's very few townhomes built in the west. I think this is only like probably like 18 townhomes that data comes from.
So if there's additional information in all of this that we got yesterday that explains how we got to those numbers, or, I'd like to see how they're calculated.
I think was it a Word document that you had links on or something like that? Yeah. Yeah. You had something yeah.
Well, we didn't get it from him, we got them from Mr. DiLorenzo.
So I went on to each of the county websites and looked to see what their impact fees were, because the Maryland legislative summary just had one flat fee. So I went to each county and pulled up what I could find on how they calculate the different impact fees and recalculated. I don't
Okay,
have it
but
handy,
do we
but
have
can
the
send it.
calculations and what the numbers?
We can send that. I have that. We can send that to you. It's different for
sorry.
each county. Go ahead.
Yeah, what exactly?
The
are you wanting?
backup information for this. Like, how did you come to?
How Michelle came up with them?
Yeah, she explained sort of on a.
Right. Okay, I guess Michelle can send you exactly how she got
I
that.
thought she said you had it, but okay.
Well,
We could work it out offline. I just
share
really like the information.
I'll make sure you have it.
Awesome, thank
Right.
you.
Yes.
So another piece of information that was requested at the last work session was the cost of a seat. We had the discussion about cost of a
Just back to that point again. Why was that an important point to share?
The
excise impact excise tax?
Because at the last work session, we discussed how our impact fees compare to other jurisdictions' impact fees. And so this shows where we stand in relation to other
I just
jurisdictions.
wanted to remind
Oh,
folks,
got
it's
it.
been a while since we had this
that is why it's
conversation,
important.
and that hasn't quite fit with a lot of the other things that we've been talking
Got it.
about
Yeah.
yet.
I was gonna say-
Because at the hearing and at our work session,
Yes.
there were contentions that that was not the case, and I just wanted to let everyone know, we appreciate you doing these calculations. We look forward to, how you calculated them, but it's good to have that information.
Certainly, and so maybe as the segue, you asked where that impact and excise tax data existed was in the State Department of Legislative Services' most recent report on local government financing. You asked for the complete report. Now, not everything, although this is a very valuable report, not everything is going to be relevant to the APFO discussion, though I included it. We can look at the table of contents if there are specific sections that you want to. But this is a general tax
interrupt.
study.
I think we know how to read, and so I think we can orient ourselves onto what makes
Yes.
sense for us. And
But
if there are questions that come out of this,
for
but
context-
this is the latest version of this
Yes.
document.
And for context, that's where
2017.
the impact and excise tax data was pulled from
Okay.
originally at last work session.
And,
So-
and for those who end up looking at this at home, having nothing to do with this conversation, but the one earlier today on education, you can look at pages 120 to 120, 120, 121, as far as what we get back for each dollar versus other jurisdictions as it relates to the school funding formulas as they come up in session with the next state sessions. So, this was the sheet that started it all off.
So if you, this is, this is like your red flag to a bull to Mr. Fox.
So another important data point that was requested at the last work session was the quote-unquote cost of a seat in a school. And so the school system actually prepared these.
Documents are called, and what you sent is a seat cost. Oh, seat cost, okay.
Yeah,
It's just
so
they
the
were- they
title
all
of the
have-
file, current figures for the cost of a seat and
Got
student
it.
generation
Thank you.
rates per unit.
No.
So these are based off of 2017 costs, and the school system provided for us the most recent costs of the newest elementary, middle, and high school in Howard County. New elementary school 43 will cost $43 million. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Oh, no, I'm sorry, $58 million. I confused number 43 with the dollar amount. $58 million with an estimated number of seats, 788 seats. That equates to approximately $73,600 per seat for the elementary school. Middle school, slightly higher at $74,000. That's Wild Lake Middle. And new high school 13 is estimated to cost $124 million at 1,600 seats. That's approximately $77,500 per seat, based on, and those seat calculations are based off of these pupil generation rates that are included in this table.
So these are pupil generation rates per unit?
By
Okay.
unit
Okay.
type, correct.
And so, by comparison, do you happen to have the number for what number 42, elementary school 42 cost?
I can ask. I do not
Yeah,
know
just
what
curious,
elementary school
or the last school that was completed.
So you can see the growth
Yeah,
rate.
just interesting, because I know that's been a concern, obviously, the construction inflation. Yeah, I know it's gone up, but the question is it commensurate with inflation, which I'm sure it's not, how much greater than?
Would you like that for elementary, middle, and high?
Please.
Growth
Yeah, I
rate
mean,
for elementary,
considering,
middle, and high?
I mean, we, the last one was Marion's
may
Ridge.
well-
I'm sure the projections
have-
for 13 is significantly higher, but it would be, I think, helpful for the last school completed.
Sure.
Or look at it from a cost per square foot basis, right? Because that changes.
Yeah, it might be interesting to look at it in both ways, per student and per square foot.
And if there's any way to now that we have this information about the excise tax, we have the information about what people are paying in for a school, we have this information about what it costs for a seat, and the executive plans on going to the administration for this, I guess, enabling legislation. What does it all mean now?
Okay.
You know, how are we putting all these data figures together to ensure that we're making a good policy decision?
Okay. Yes, we can do that. And a number of the other.
This is probably why I shouldn't sit next to it. We're trying to.
I was listening with this ear, Mr. Di Lorenzo.
We were doing formulas for other ways of calculating numbers, sorry.
Well, I think it's really important to note that Mr. Di Lorenzo clearly gave us all information that we needed to kind of check next door about, right?
Yeah.
So thank you.
There you
We
go.
appreciate it.
So the school system actually walked through a number of the data, additional data that we prepared as it relates to capacity and enrollment. I would say the last new information that we provided for this work session, which was requested of us, was to provide a visual. Open it up. Provide a visual of what happens at different capacity levels at both the elementary, middle, and high school level. And so we prepared those maps for you. They're all in one file. As a summary, we did elementary, middle, and high school at 100%, 110%, 115%, and 120% of capacity utilization.
Just for
as
high
well
schools.
as just for high schools at 120, as well as one overlay chart. So we can walk through each of those maps with you just to.
What's the overlay chart? Which
It's
one?
the very last map which overlays middle and middle and elementary at 100%.
The last map is the 120 schools, the high school, so it must be it's the third to last.
Third to last. Third to
Sorry,
last.
okay. Yeah.
So let me get this to fit on the screen.
Colleagues, is it right if we start maybe with that overlay map? Because the other ones are straightforward. It just shows open, close for different percentages. I can explain the last.
Those are just really quickly, so those are high school, middle, elementary school, just showing what, if you made that particular test 100%, what would be open and closed?
Correct.
Okay.
The first 9.
Yeah, the first 3.
Right, well.
Oh, and then the 110%, okay,
Yeah,
and
the
then
first 9
115%.
are at 100, 110, 115.
So our first
Those
three
are
maps are the 100%
Right.
capacity levels this is based off of the most recent open-close chart approved by the county council, passed by the Board of Ed in May of 2017. So this is high school closures at 100% capacity. Red is closed. Now, there's no high school test, so this is theoretical. And the green is open. So as you can see, the closed high schools would be.
Yeah, I think we can
Okay,
read the
okay,
charts.
okay, very
What
good.
I was asking is, because we've seen those types of charts before, it's this overlay one, if you can describe what that
Okay.
is, and then I was going to just offer an explanation for the last one and had a
Okay.
question about that.
So.
So
here
on
are the
page
100.
10 of the chart.
So this is an overlay. I'll let Mr. Bronow explain the overlay
So
map
we
for
created
you.
this because the way APFO, the Open Closed Schools test works is it's all or nothing. You have to pass all 3 tests, elementary district, elementary region, and middle school district. So if one was open but the other's closed, it doesn't matter. So what this does is overlays the region, the middle school, and the elementary school all in one map. So if the capacity was set to 100%, based on the current chart, only the green area in there would be
Clarksville.
open to development. So the entire county would be shut down to development based on the current 2020 year.
And can you do 110, 115% with the same chart?
We haven't, but we can certainly do that,
Yeah.
yeah.
Because I was
Right.
going to say, and given that most of that is in my district, I will tell you there's virtually nothing left to develop there,
In that area.
in that area.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and that goes to the conversation I had way earlier, Ms. Delmont Small pointing out, be interesting to see where
Right.
there are areas left of development. It's a complicated chart, but I don't know.
Oh, I
not
see. Yeah, we can
necessarily-
overlay our land use map that I mentioned to her.
Be
which
interesting.
shows the
I don't know if you
projected,
could,
yeah.
it would be legible, but it would be interesting. The only one, if I can confirm, since I did request this one, the last one on 12, was, so this was intended to look at
What's
high
it
schools.
titled? They're not page numbered, so if you just tell me what the title, that
I'm
would help.
sorry. It's the closed high school districts districts closed at 120% capacity in future 3 years on current AFO chart. So the criteria behind this was supposed to be if on the approved AFO chart, if the high school's at 120% and then increases continually over that amount for the next 3 years, that would be closed. So I'm not sure that grabbed that, because I was
Yeah, it's a little different than, and there's another caveat with this. I think I need to redo the high school charts only because the high school, there is no current AFO chart for high schools. So I based it off the 2017 feasibility study.
Sure, okay.
Pre-measure.
Yeah.
And then some information that Renee proposed based on based on what we talked about today. It's a little different.
Okay.
So I think I need to go with her numbers.
Okay.
For her high school
Well,
capacities. I'm not sure what her source was compared
Yeah,
to,
I
I
mean,
just want
but
to
we
make sure that I do it correctly. Yeah.
Wait, I'm confused by that. So which,
I was trying to
What-
find it. She provided
But what-
in part of her data set
but is it changed data set?
alternative
That's what I'm-
AFO test scenarios. And so for high schools, there is no APFO chart, open close chart. So when I made these high school maps, I based it off of the numbers in the feasibility study, which she called
Right.
APFO-like.
Yeah.
But I think
heard
that
before.
APFO-like is different than what she just provided here, so I just need to.
And what are the, yeah, it'd be
I need
interesting
to
to know
talk
what
to her to
those.
figure out what's the correct high school numbers to use.
And you use 2020 because that's the next testing year? Is that
That's the current testing year.
current
Yeah,
testing
so
year,
that would
okay.
be, this would be in effect if, at least the middle and elementary, it would be the impact if the capacities were changed from 115 to 110 or 100, whatever they show, based on the current year.
And does this include or not include redistricting?
Does not.
But it includes what I thought their charts as we speak, their open closed
those would
charts
be
have
the-
some anticipated redistricting in them.
Mr. Russo, they have what happened last year, so the open and closed chart. Oh, and in the feasibility study,
Right in the out years, it shows.
in the post measure.
Yeah, so I
The
think.
post measure,
Oh.
if the feasibility study recommends redistricting, well, if, with
Yeah,
the
right.
application of of their capital projects, because they can't determine whether or not the redistricting is
I
going to
thought,
happen.
my understanding was it included redistricting.
So it includes feasible redistricting also. So it includes, like, so for example, if the capital budget shows an addition,
Yes.
or a new school, it would, the APFO chart that is currently adopted assumes that capacity because it's in the capital budget, and it also assumes a feasible redistricting based on that. And that's why you have that OCIP sometimes.
Correct.
Where
Or
you
the
would have,
C.
exactly, yeah.
So you use the post measures, so it had those things in them.
For the elementary, middle schools, I use the actual APFO chart. For the high school, I use the pre-measures for the 2017 feasibility. But based on what Ms. Kamen provided today, I think we're going to need to rework the high school
Okay.
maps to make sure they're consistent with their, since we don't actually have an APFO test for high school at this point.
And do we know, so this was, and these are really helpful, I have to say. I really like the visual and how that worked. So, do we know how many years?
There's a reason for that.
Yeah, I will say, they gave me a new mic afterwards because they'd already switched it with one of you all, so one of you all. Or, yeah, no, they gave me a different one. I was sitting here. So with 2021 or 22, do we know, like, for the next 2-3 years? does
That's in the
this-
current chart. That's the 20, it's a 10-year chart. So we have all those numbers in there, but the maps only reflect 2020.
And do you know if those are, do we have that data here? I mean, is that significantly different, I guess, is part of my question.
I think in most cases, the capacity gets the utilization, it gets higher as you move forward.
So meaning
Yeah.
there'd be more, they'd stay closed.
Right.
Okay.
And those numbers are in the actual chart, but they're not on the maps.
If you could just send us or point me after this to if
The
nobody
chart.
else cares, to the charts that relate to that, just so I can figure out if I'm looking at the same.
Sure.
Thanks.
And if you can validate the criteria for that
High
last
schools.
map.
Yeah, okay, right, sure.
Because I was surprised that there was one more.
I think, exactly, I think
closed.
there's one more. I think it was Hebron.
Yeah.
Hebron's closed, it doesn't show up on this, right?
Yeah.
Right.
so. All right. Yeah, just I want to validate that in that very last chart that the criteria of increasing capacity was applied appropriately, which could make sense, but then my thought would have been how Hebron would have been closed on the general one as well, the one without the increasing. So it just asking to validate that was accurate. So
114.9 and not be closed. Instead of
right,
115.
Or 119, yeah, no, it's.
Yeah.
Yep. All right,
Highlights a problem in and of itself, Ms. Sigety.
No, it's,
Right.
sure.
Because if you're that close, if you're 0.1 away from closing, but we're not looking at it because it's on the side of whether we look at it or not.
Well,
I think.
I mean, it does, what your point is that these numbers are unfortunately somewhat arbitrary. I mean, when we pick a
Right.
number, we're picking a number.
we pick a number, right, and then we have to.
And that number is, we can't say, well, plus or minus 0.5%. Because
How
then
do you
what we're
pick?
doing is picking the number that's 0.5% lower, so.
Well, I don't think the problem is the arbitrariness of the number. I think the problem is that it's a black or white, like
Sure.
we're either looking at it or we're not.
Right.
So I don't think the arbitrariness of the number is that
No,
may be a
I
different
don't
point.
mean, at the end of it, it's sort of like, we have to pick the number. I think the way you're saying is a little bit better than what I said, is we have to pick a number, and it then becomes, it's a binary sort of test.
Right, the
Either
binary
tests,
nature of the
it's
test
pass
is what
or
I'm,
fail. Right.
the binary nature of the test is what I'm saying. It's a little,
Well, and
And so
actually, part
perhaps-
of what I was attempting to do
Yeah.
with this last chart was to make it a little less binary, to look at it in a multi-year scenario, as opposed to just a single year point in time, which it complexifies an already complex process, and sort of counter to what I would like to do is to see if we can't simplify. I mean, some of what we have talked about here is, in looking at open close and in the rated capacities, it is not clear. And we're an above average community. People come in and look at these numbers, pretty smart people, and for really smart people not be able to figure this out because it's not abundantly clear when you just look at the numbers. I mean, that's, so some of what I'm trying to do is figure out how can we make it a little bit simpler so that anybody who's participating and paying attention gets the full picture, so.
Well, I think that everybody who's participating and wants predictability, wants to know what the number is, right? And what the number is what the number is. And so if you get to 114.9, you still haven't hit the number. And so we can either say that the number is the number, whatever we choose it to be, and it is not variable in any way, shape, or form, or we can say the number is the number, but there may be circumstances where we would want to vary it, and how would we do that?
And I think, this ties in, and we haven't figured out, I think, at least not as a body, how to do this yet, but this ties into the discussion that we had at our last work session, I think it was our last one, about trying to define a legal way to address the mitigation requests that we've heard from the Board of Ed and the community, and what that looks like. And so an option for consideration is, the number being the number, but before you get to the number, there are certain triggers where we look at things, we have hearings, we alert people, we start, looking at funding models, site acquisition. There are certain things that we can do to improve the planning process and the public participation process before all of a sudden, boom, we're at the number.
Pre-APFO practices, perhaps. Right, yeah, good point.
Yeah,
So,
I have, just to I mean, I know we're not necessarily discussing amendments now since we have 14
No,
minutes
no,
left.
and yeah, we have 14
But I do
minutes,
have an
so-
amendment that looks at that, so.
Which specifically?
This
The
sort of what
triggers,
can we do
the
in
pre-
earlier, yeah.
Okay.
So, and I'm sure others do as well, but I think it's worth us discussing.
Right. And so, actually, to that point, Ms. Ross, colleagues, I did send an email out earlier today, literally, I think right before we all walked into the room at 8:30 this morning, about an effort to try and get amendments in by the 20th, Friday the 20th, so that on the 23rd of the month, when we have a regular work session on legislation for this month, that we can also look at amendments for these two pieces of legislation. We are fortunate to have a long month this month, an extra Monday, fortunate or not. So very fortunate, so.
And how we define our months, at least.
Yeah, it's so we eventually, we so often get these. So so we have actually almost an extra week. We have actually a week for formal amendment filing. So at this point, not knowing what we're going to hear at our public hearing on Monday for legislation before us this month, sort of doing a quick evaluation, it appears that we might not have a heavy work session calendar for the legislation before us this month. That assuming we do not bring a lot of other items to our work session agenda for the 23rd, we could spend a good amount of time in work session on amendments specific to this, because I think many of us are considering amendments. We're considering amendments that might be similar, and it would be helpful, I think, to go through that process as a body.
And the two issues that I think might require a little bit more time and energy are both resolutions and not time sensitive.
Yes,
And that's
correct.
the environmental one, and then the one we just talked about yesterday at the work session, the EBOC one.
Right. Yes. Right. Those are not time sensitive. Right. And don't have a shelf life. Right. So I think that we had already talked about bringing that on the work session, so we may opt not to and move that out to a different work session. And also
I wanted to bring it up
No,
in
that's a
public
good
for
point,
anybody who's
because
watching those two issues, that we might
Right.
we might be able to kind of get a few things off of our agenda this month,
Right.
like a vote on APFO, mulch. I think those are the last two big
those are the
ones.
two that are left over.
That's it.
That expire. And on the EBOC
Well, and
thing, I
there's
think
the downtown one.
That's a resolution.
Oh, that's resolution, okay.
Yeah.
Right.
I guess we should figure out if there are time-sensitive stuff there, Ms. Siggett. I mean, not today, but at some point, if you can just let us know, because I never even thought about that. I don't know if
Yeah, no, that's
there are
the-
certain bonds out there, or if the Housing Commission is doing something, or something with Toby's where we do need to dispose of that.
Right, I
sooner.
do know that they are in fact working on trying to put together the financing. So the
Sure.
sooner we can act on that, the.
So-
So
Might
that
need
might be
to-
the one that if we want a work session on that,
Yep.
would be one we could address. And I think if we can, Ms. Feldmark, maybe give us a couple of days and send out a request on the EBOC thing, if we can let our friends know that we might not even work session it this month. They sort of suggested they might need a little bit more time
Sure.
to consider what we've requested of them, to give us some feedback on that, so.
Okay, so would you want to plan to invite them back for the work session in November then?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. Okay, so that's sort of where we are today. I think we're in a good place to keep working on the things, a natural breaking point, and we are scheduled for a conversation, work session on mulch on Monday.
Monday at 4 o'clock.
At 4 o'clock. Okay, so that will be our next time. Mr. Brown, again, thank you very much for all the data you keep throwing our way, and your flexibility in adjusting the data you give us to the data that when we think of different things. And then, Mr. Lorenzo, thank you for your additional information today.
Sure, and I have some follow-up items from today that
Right.
I'll get to you.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Trying to remember, did we end up asking for the similar type of thing on transportation as far as in going through? I mean, it's a little bit different on those, but just
In terms
maybe of the evaluation of the other jurisdictions.
I'd asked them to go through the entire
list. Okay, good. All right, thanks. I couldn't remember.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, folks. Have a great day.